Timeless Assassin by Raj_Shaw_7152 Chapter 276-300. Time-stilled world, 31 kilometers from entry point, Ashen Grassland Ridge. The group had grown noticeably quieter ever since they encountered the trail of the tainted human. Patricia, once playful and flirtatious, now walked in grim silence with her dagger drawn and held low, as the usual sway in her step was replaced by caution. Carl flinched at every gust of wind, nearly stumbling more than once as he struggled to keep pace without tripping over his own feet, the tension in his shoulders betraying his rising anxiety. The others were no more at ease, each gripping a mana stone in one hand to absorb a steady stream of clean mana, while their dominant hand remained coiled around the hilt of a weapon, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Their formation remained loosely aligned, spread just far enough to allow freedom of movement, while still holding together with enough caution. Even the air seemed heavier now, pressing down on them with a strange, suffocating weight, as if something unseen was trailing them just beyond the edge of perception. The trail they'd been following for nearly 8 kilometers had remained disturbingly consistent, twisted human footprints, each paired with a palm print, until, all of a sudden, it stopped without explanation. "The hell?" Raiden muttered, slowing to a halt as he studied the abrupt end of the trail with narrowed eyes. Before him stretched a low-lying ridge, shallow and oddly symmetrical, resembling a grassy swell formed by some forgotten upheaval of the earth. Yet unlike the endless plains that they had passed thus far, this particular stretch stood out distinctly. The usual gray, metallic grass had disappeared entirely, replaced by a dense spread of thorned flowers, hundreds of them, that were short-stemmed and pale, with fat, bulbous heads that swayed unnaturally in the still, windless air. The soil beneath them was coarse and pebbled, absorbing their footsteps without leaving any impressions behind, which could likely explain the sudden disappearance of the trail. "The trail ends here," Raiden said grimly as he crouched, brushing his fingers across the unmarked ground, before rising once more and sweeping his gaze across the flower-coated ridge. "There are no more prints past this point." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes sharpening as they swept across the terrain. "Be cautious. There are quite a lot of blind spots someone could use to ambush us from around here," he warned, as the group immediately shifted into high alert, each member adjusting their stance, their feet planting more deliberately while their eyes flicked toward every potential vantage point. Something about this patch of land gnawed at their instincts. It felt like a trap laid in plain sight. As assassins, they knew better than most as to what made a perfect kill zone, and this was it. If they absolutely had to ambush someone in the wide open of these grasslands, this patch of land was the perfect spot. Here, one had limited room for movement, as the thorny terrain made it harder to fight or escape, while the surrounding lowland ridges could help conceal a threat until it was too late, making it the perfect spot for ambush. Absolute vision. Leo cycled mana through his body with practiced control, activating absolute vision as a faint image of his surroundings popped in his mind. At first, he scanned the ridge out of habit, searching for hidden enemies or concealed weapons. But what he perceived next did not align with anything he had expected. Absolute vision was a technique built on mana imagery, a perception-based skill that used microscopic pulses of mana to scan the surroundings and then feed that information directly into the user's brain as a reconstructed image. Back in normal space, this information came in high resolution. Every crack in the pavement, every glint of a sword, every subtle shift in muscle tension, all of it appeared crisp and clear, bordering on high definition. But here, within the time-stilled world, the information came back distorted. The landscape around him blurred and bled together, like a wet painting left out in the rain. The vision wasn't blacked out or fully blinded, but it felt as though the feedback his brain was receiving had been corrupted, as if 1,000 mismatched signals were being slammed into his senses all at once. It was like trying to study a landscape through a lens that had 5,000 flashlights pointed directly into it, as it appeared too bright, too inconsistent, and painfully oversaturated. On the surface, nothing looked unusual to the naked eye. The thorny flowers swayed gently, the ash-laced wind carried on, and the dull terrain stretched outward like always. But through absolute vision, the world became something else entirely. Every blade of grass, every twisted flower, even the smallest patches of moss, pulsed with such concentrated mana that they eclipsed the stone he was holding in his palm. The very soil beneath his feet had veins of glowing energy running through it, like this entire patch of land was not natural terrain, but a sealed mana battery disguised as a field. And where there should have been gradients and balance, there was only saturation. He tried to isolate a few regions of low interference, hoping to identify paths of mana-free passage, but even those came back as noisy outlines, broken by bursts of uncontrolled radiance. Leo narrowed his eyes slightly, adjusting his stance and reducing the amount of mana he circulated into the skill, attempting to dull the feedback. However, no matter how he tried to map the area around him, the end result remained the same, as absolute vision failed to provide him with a clean and usable image. This place, it isn't just rich in mana. It's flooded with it. It's contaminated everything living inside this world, including the blades of grass growing here. Like, how the fuck does the grass at my feet have more mana stored in it than the stone in my hand? Leo wondered, his grip tightening ever so slightly around the mana stone, as a chill crawled up his spine, not from fear, but from the growing sense that this world operated on rules no one had prepared him for. Just where the fuck did I agree to come? With absolute vision failing to map the area accurately, Leo was forced to rely on traditional perception, keen instincts, and peripheral focus, to scan the ridge in front of him for signs of enemy presence. His breath slowed as he centered his footing atop the uneven slope, dagger gripped tightly in one hand as he locked his gaze on the exact spot that seemed the most suspicious to him. Shuffle. Then it happened, he heard a sound come from behind him, as thud. A blur of flesh and speed exploded from the ridge's left flank, from his blind side, as a pale figure darted from behind a patch of thorny flowers and moved with blinding speed towards Cypher. Cypher! Patricia shouted, trying to warn him about the ambush, however, it was too late. The tainted human moved like a beast, not a man, darting across the ground on all fours with a hunched spine and limbs bent at unnatural angles, his speed exceeding what most grandmasters couldn't even dream of matching. Swish! Asterisk. Cypher turned, his blade flashing outward in reflex. But the creature twisted mid-air with an erratic jerk, narrowly avoiding the strike as it wrapped its limbs tightly around Cypher's body. Crunch! Asterisk. A sickening sound tore through the air as blood exploded from Cypher's neck, the creature's jaws clamping down and ripping a chunk of flesh clean out, as Cypher screamed in pain. Arg! Leo reacted instantly, hurling a dagger towards the creature's skull with deadly precision, while Patricia followed suit, her own blade flying through the air in a mirrored arc. Clang! Asterisk. Thud! Asterisk. Both daggers struck true, but shockingly bounced harmlessly off the creature's skin, as though it were armor-plated. What the? Patricia muttered in confusion, as her Grandmaster strength was usually enough to even embed rocks, however, had somehow failed to penetrate mortal skin today. Thankfully for Cypher though, Bob was already charging forward, as boom! Asterisk. He slammed his shoulder into the creature, knocking it off Cypher's back and sending it tumbling through the dirt. The creature skidded, rolled, and landed in a crouch on all fours, before beginning to hiss like a feral beast. Skiiiiirrrr. It warned, its facial hairs flaring like a beast sensing prey through vibration. Now that they could see it clearly, Leo's eyes narrowed as he took in the details. It looked almost human. But its skin was stretched tight over wiry muscle, and pulsing green veins ran visibly beneath its pale surface. It wore nothing but a tattered utility belt that hung lopsided around its waist, clearly from another era. On one foot it still wore half of a disintegrated combat boot, while on the other it was completely exposed to the elements. Its man parts looked disfigured and chewed upon, as whatever remained was clearly not functional. However, somehow that mess of flesh wasn't the worst body feature it had, as its eyes were even worse. Wild, and glowing faintly with an unnatural hue, the creature's gaze did not hold intelligence or malice, but rather only madness. Like it had long forgotten what it was to be human, and was now only driven by instinct and rage. He's gone completely feral, Leo muttered. Forget talking. Kill it, Raiden snapped, already moving. The creature hissed and darted forward, zigzagging on all fours like a monkey on speed. It lunged at Patricia this time, who ducked and rolled as Leo moved to flank it. Raiden slashed horizontally, forcing it to leap backward, while Bob already circled behind it, to punch it unconscious. However, when the beast did eventually come his way, it dodged his strike with an unnatural rotation of its body, and landed on his shoulders, before immediately trying to bite his face off. Khaiiiiiaass. The beast growled, as spittle and germs from its roar spilled all over Bob's face, making the veteran assassin feel really pissed. Get off. Bob growled, grabbing the thing mid-air and flinging it like a sack of meat, as the creature landed hard but rolled into a crouch again, unhurt. Damn, this thing doesn't break, Patricia complained, her voice sounding slightly nervous now. Leo darted in from the side, feinting left then spinning with a backward slash, as the beast evaded by a hair, but the maneuver gave Raiden an opening. Phase cut, Raiden announced, as his blade flickered with mana and flashed through the air tracing a green arc. It grazed the creature's ribs, drawing black blood that steamed in the cold air. Shriek. The creature shrieked and pounced at Raiden, only to be intercepted mid-air by Bob's glowing fist, as boom! The punch connected with the creature's side, sending it hurtling through the flowers, its jaw broken, as Leo activated blade switch and reappeared behind it, his daggers slashing outward in an X to carve open its back. SHHHK. The first strike failed to penetrate its skin, but the second caught its shoulder, slicing halfway in before stopping against the shoulder bone. Now! Leo barked, as Raiden surged forward with a vertical strike and Patricia released her charged skill, Needle Rain. Within a microsecond, hundreds of razor-thin projectiles conjured from mana rained down upon the beast, as the feral human hissed and tried to leap, but Bob tackled it from behind, pinning it with brute strength as the needles pierced its body. Shriek. The beast whimpered louder now, as Raiden's blade came down one final time, to slice its head apart from its body. Splat. Raiden's blade buried deep into its neck, stopping just short of a full decapitation as the edge lodged halfway through bone. Thankfully, that was enough, as the creature convulsed once. Then again. Then it stopped moving entirely, its body slumping into the dirt with a final exhale that sounded less like death and more like relief. The team stood still, weapons raised, eyes sharp and breaths shallow, as they watched the beast for any last twitch or sign of movement that would suggest that it could rise again. However, none came. Only silence reigned in their surroundings, bar from Cypher's whimpering, as he tried to stop the bleeding from his neck. A few seconds later, the beast's eyes that were still glowing faintly, finally dimmed and began rolling back into its sockets, as black blood pooled beneath its cheek. Leo didn't sheath his blade. He just stood there, watching, his gaze fixed on the half-torn utility belt still fastened around the corpse's waist. It was the same kind they were all wearing. Same material. Same type of make, as it was for sure an assassin belt, which meant that the man they just killed was once upon a time an assassin. Sigh. Leo exhaled slowly, his chest tightening with something colder than fear. He wasn't born a monster. He became one in this world. After absorbing the tainted mana, Leo realized, as just like that, the reality of the time-stilled world finally settled over him and the rest of the team like a second skin. This place didn't just kill one. It warped one into something unrecognizable. And if they weren't careful, it was also the same fate that awaited them all. As apparently, death wasn't the worst thing that could happen to one in a time-stilled world. In a way, death was a mercy. As if you lived long enough, much worse things than death awaited you in this accursed place. Time-stilled world, 70 kilometers from entry point, temporary camp. After surviving the encounter with the man-beast, the team continued their journey for a few more kilometers, pushing forward in wary silence, before finally reaching their predetermined rest point after nearly 8 hours of uninterrupted walking. They did not set up tents, nor did they ignite any fire when it was finally time to make camp, as everyone knew that lighting a flame in this world was equivalent to painting a target on your back, so instead, they found a natural hollow between two ridges and sat down in a loose circle, resting for the first time since the fight. The silence in the air was broken only by the soft clinks of armor being adjusted and weapons being set aside, as the team removed their shin guards and boots, letting their feet breathe for a moment of rare comfort. Carl, who somehow seemed in a better mood than anyone else, hummed to himself as he set up a black stone slab over 3 glowing firestones, the stones glowing a faint orange beneath the grill as they radiated silent heat without releasing any flame, creating the perfect surface for cooking without drawing unwanted attention from the wilds around them. Once the slab was up to temperature, Carl oiled the surface and placed thinly sliced meat and dehydrated root vegetables onto it, watching them sizzle and soften slowly while the faintest wisp of steam curled upward into the still air. Sigh. Patricia exhaled deeply as she leaned back on her arms, sipping water from a pouch with half-lidded eyes, as she watched the meat cook with something between relief and hunger. Now this is what I call survival, she muttered lazily, her usual flirt gone, replaced by a tired smirk that only slightly masked how drained she looked. The fatigue wasn't from walking, but from the slow, grinding psychological pressure this world seemed to place on everyone who spent more than a few hours within its grasp. Meanwhile, Cypher sat hunched forward, one hand wrapped around the bandage on his neck as he muttered a string of curses under his breath. Fucking inbred retarded ape. Bit my neck off, he grumbled, the pain clearly still present even after Carl had cleaned, stitched, and dosed him with 2 different potions to accelerate the healing process. Gods, it still hurts like a bitch, he added, massaging the side of his neck carefully, as Raiden sat beside him, listening with a faint smile that hovered somewhere between sympathy and amusement, nodding occasionally, yet saying little, as he did his best to let Cypher vent as much as he needed. On the far end, Bob sat with his back to a rock, legs stretched out and a blade resting across his lap, as he poured water and oil over a rectangular whetstone before dragging the edge of a tall knife across it in long, steady strokes, each pass accompanied by a soft grinding sound that hummed through the silence like the rhythm of a war drum. Do you even use that giant knife? Patricia asked after a while, her eyes flicking toward him, or is it just for show? Because I've only seen you fight with your fists. Bob didn't answer immediately. He clicked his tongue, shifting the toothpick in his mouth from one side to the other, before eventually replying in his usual gruff tone, his gaze never leaving the blade. I haven't had to use this bad boy yet, he said, voice low and slow, but after seeing how your daggers bounced off that thing's skin, I figured I'd rather not find out mid-battle that mine isn't sharp enough. Leo, seated nearby, scoffed quietly at the comment and chuckled under his breath. That's the most I've ever heard you speak, he said flatly, as Patricia grinned, stretching her legs out in front of her while casting a sideways glance at Leo, her teasing spark flickering back to life. I have a way with men, Skyshard, she purred, voice soft and sultry, they always tell me things they wouldn't say to anyone else. Leo didn't respond, his expression unmoved as he stared down at the potion bottle in his hand, while Patricia chuckled to herself and turned her attention back to the sizzling grill, the scent of food slowly filling the air and mingling with the lingering scent of ash and mana that never quite left this world. Soon, the food finished cooking and Carl portioned it carefully onto thin steel plates, before handing them around with an eager grin that didn't quite match the fatigue in his eyes. Hope you like it crispy, he said, plopping a slice of charred meat beside some softened roots on Leo's plate before moving on to the next. You've officially earned your place on this team, rookie, this is delicious, Patricia said while chewing, as she gave him a thumbs up. Glad you liked it, Carl replied cheerfully, clearly happy to be useful. For a while, the group ate in relative silence, the occasional clink of cutlery on metal or the soft sounds of chewing breaking the monotony, as they slowly drifted into casual conversation, sharing stories and banter, each beginning to know the other just a little better. They spoke of their interests, traded tales of their most memorable kills, and laughed more than once, not because anything was particularly funny, but because laughter was sometimes the only weapon one had against creeping dread, and for a brief while, it worked. For those few minutes, the ashen plains, the blood, and the madness of the time-stilled world faded into the background, as everything almost felt normal. Almost. Because no matter how normal things felt in that moment, the world around them never changed. The grass was still gray, the air still heavy, and the mana still clung to their skin like a film of ash. The laughter was real, the food warm, and the company tolerable. But the silence that followed between words always felt too long. And the shadows that crept just beyond their camp never felt like they stopped watching. And though no one said it aloud, they all knew, this peace wouldn't last. No chance it did. Not in this accursed world. Time-stilled world, 140 kilometers from entry point, outer rim of the Forest of Death. The remainder of the journey toward the Forest of Death passed without much incident, as the team encountered no sudden ambushes, no storms, and no hidden traps, just a slow, grinding march across ashen plains and the occasional ridge, where a few more mutated lizards crossed their path. But these beasts were nothing compared to the man-beast they had slain. Though fast and armored, they lacked the feral cunning and brutal tenacity of that tainted assassin, and with the team's coordination steadily improving, such threats were dealt with quickly and cleanly. By the end of the second day, they had covered the full 140 kilometers from the drop site, arriving at the edge of the Forest of Death, an expanse that looked as haunting as any graveyard. Their clothes were caked in dust, their boots dulled by the ever-present ash, and their nerves thinned by the pressure of this cursed world, but they had made it. All of them. And that's all that mattered for now. Dash 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 dash. The first impression Leo got from the Forest of Death was simple: the trees here were just wrong. They weren't simply tall, but unnaturally vertical, rising like the spine of some ancient beast rather than anything birthed by nature. Their trunks were bone white, streaked with black veins, and the canopy above was so dense it strangled out the last traces of light long before it reached the ground. The Forest of Death might as well have been called the Forest of Darkness, because after just 20 meters past the tree line, Leo could barely see anything around him at all. "All right, time to pull out your night vision goggles," Raiden said, voice low but firm, as one by one, the group complied. Thanks to the field notes left behind by past expeditions, they already knew the rules to survive in the Forest of Death. No loud noise, no sudden movements, and never, under any circumstance, light a fire for vision. That was why Raiden had made sure each of them was equipped with night vision before even setting foot on this cursed land. One by one, the lenses slid into place, bathing the world in shades of green, as Leo blinked against the static and felt his sight return. "From here on out, we move in a single file," Raiden instructed, his tone heavier now. "Step only where the guy in front of you has stepped. No detours. No tomfoolery." He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. Because the moment they moved deeper, just 10 more steps into that suffocating blackness, every single one of them felt it. The shift, the weight, the slow onset of dread. The Forest of Death didn't warn you. It simply pressed in on you, quietly, relentlessly, until your sanity began to bend. And in such a place, their only strength was each other. Crunch. Their boots crunched softly against the mulch-like ground, each step deliberate, as Leo scanned left and right with growing discomfort. The trees felt alive. He sensed it in the way the bark seemed to faintly pulse when he passed too close and the way the vines coiled ever so slightly, just enough to register in his peripheral vision. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overt. But it was there. Like the forest was breathing. And watching. No one spoke for the first 30 minutes. Until, did you hear that? Someone's laughing up ahead, Carl muttered, glancing to the side. No, there isn't, Cypher snapped instantly, not even looking over. That's one of the illusions of the forest. Ignore it. It's not real. Carl nodded shakily, forcing himself forward again, though Leo noticed the twitch in his stride. 5 minutes passed. Then Leo stopped cold. "I see figures moving between the trees," he said, voice tight and focused. "Illusions," Raiden replied immediately, his pace unbroken. "Ignore them." But it wasn't that simple. Because illusions are not, they felt real. The shadows drifted just slow enough to be seen. They didn't charge or lunge. They just watched, always lingering between trees, always just far enough to be unreachable and untouchable. Leo tried activating absolute vision once, then twice. Both times his mind was flooded with static, the feedback crashing into his brain like blinding heat, forcing him to shut it down. However, his real eyes weren't any better. Everywhere he looked, silhouettes danced and twisted just outside his reach, taunting him with the uncertainty of what was real and what wasn't. This is insane. If I don't know what's real and what's not, how the fuck am I supposed to react to danger? Leo thought bitterly, his fingers tightening around his daggers as sweat pooled between his fingers. Somewhere behind him, Bob muttered under his breath. They're calling my name. What? Patricia whispered. They said it again. Just now. No one said anything, Bob, she replied, her voice quieter now, tense and fragile, as the truth began to settle in. The forest was fucking with their minds. 10 more minutes passed. The group stayed in formation, breaths controlled, blades half drawn, but their nerves were stretched taut, and the illusions weren't letting up. They were relentless. Even if they never attacked, they gnawed at the mind, breaking down focus, eroding composure, whittling sanity into splinters. Then, Leo felt it. A cold, wet sensation brushing against his boot. He looked down and there was fog. Where did this come from? He wondered, as he was sure that he did not see them walking into a fog field. Which meant that this fog wasn't drifting from ahead, nor descending from above, but rather rising from the ground beneath them. It coiled slowly around his ankles, pale and wispy at first, then thickening with each step forward, as his instincts began to scream, danger. Raiden stopped. So did everyone else. What is this? Cypher? Carl asked quietly, his voice trembling. I don't know, Cypher replied after a pause, as that silence said more than his words ever could. Because no one understood what this was. Not Raiden, not Cypher, not the guild records, not the expedition logs, not even the oldest fragments Leo had ever studied. This fog wasn't in any of the documentation, which made it the most dangerous kind of threat. The threat of unknown. Leo stared down as the mist reached his knees, its chill seeping into his clothes and numbing his skin. His senses were already shot. His vision was compromised. His instincts were screaming. And yet, the forest around them remained eerily still. Almost like it was holding its breath for a big event to unfold. Time-stilled world, 4 kilometers into the forest of death, between a mysterious fog field. The fog didn't roll in. It rose. Quiet. Pale. Patient. It seeped up from the ground like it had been waiting there all along, tucked beneath the mulch and ash, curling around ankles and knees with the slow certainty of death. At first it was just mist, thin and gentle, like dew. But as the team pushed deeper into the forest, it thickened. Until they could no longer see the ground at all. Leo felt it immediately. Not on his skin, but in his gut. Something was off. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to stop, to turn around and run, but his legs kept moving, one foot after the other, following the file. The others felt it too. He could see it in the tension of their shoulders, in the shallow rhythm of their breath that they were all nervous as well. Keep your spacing, no need to bump into one another. We are not kindergarten kids walking towards school. We are grown-ass assassins, damn it, Raiden ordered quietly, though his voice carried an unfamiliar strain. He tried to sound tough, trying to inspire confidence in the team to not be afraid of something as inconsequential as cold fog. However, it was easier said than done. As once the fog rose up to their waists, was when the real menace began. The first sign was the sound. Leo heard a whisper. Not from ahead, nor from behind. But rather from just beside him. Leo. A soft voice said. But it wasn't just any voice, it was a voice he vividly recognized. It was the voice of Elena, his mother, from back when he was just a kid running into her arms. He turned instinctively, dagger half drawn, but there was no one there. Just vines, fog, and trees that pulsed faintly as if breathing through the bark. He glanced back. The team hadn't noticed, as once again it seemed like he was the only one who had heard these whispers. Focus, he muttered to himself, shaking off the echo, but then Patricia spoke up. Raiden, I think someone's following us. I keep hearing footsteps behind mine. Like 2 seconds after. Illusion, Raiden said again. But this time it wasn't firm, it was just a word. A hope. Moments later, Carl stopped walking altogether. Guys, he whispered, where's Cypher? What do you mean? Leo asked, glancing ahead. But Cypher was gone. Vanished from the file. No sound, no trace, no scream. Just, gone. Raiden immediately raised a fist. The group froze, hearts pounding, as they scanned around with night vision. For a moment they saw nothing, but then a shape stepped forward from the mist. And thankfully it was Cypher. Sorry, he said. I tripped, got turned around, I'm good. But Leo's eyes narrowed, because the Cypher that returned had injury on the wrong side of his neck. Wasn't he bit on the right side of his neck? Leo wondered, blinking again. However, by the time he opened his eyes again, the bandages had shifted to the right, as if his previous image of him having an injury on the wrong side had been nothing but another illusion. The hell? Leo wondered, blinking a few more times, but nothing changed. The bandage stayed put, as he really started to get spooked now. Bite me, he thought. Nonetheless, he said nothing, as he did not want to spook the rest of the group with him. Beads of sweat began to glisten on his forehead because of the stress, as although the lower half of his body was being chilled by the cool fog, his forehead still perspirated, as such was the pressure of this terrain. More minutes passed, and the fog slowly rose up to their chest, as this was when things began to change again. The trunks of the trees around them began to bend. At first, Leo thought it was another illusion, nothing more than a trick of the eye. But no. The trees were actually curving and leaning inward, ever so subtly. It was as if the forest itself were trying to guide them towards a particular path, and Leo did not appreciate this guidance one bit. Fuck. Is it too late to run? Leo wondered, when Bob suddenly broke the silence. My brother's here, he said, as everyone turned. What? I see him, Bob muttered. Right there. Behind that tree. He died 10 years ago, but he's here now. He's looking at me. Patricia reached for the space between the trees where Bob was pointing, as if to touch it and ask, are you seeing the illusion here? But Leo grabbed her wrist first. Don't touch it, he said. Because Leo could see it too now. A silhouette. Smiling. Perfect teeth. Eyes that glowed too bright to belong to the dead. However, apparently, him and Bob were the only two to see that figure, while the others did not. The fuck is going on here? Do you see it as well, Skyshard? Patricia asked. However, before Leo could respond, the night vision goggles glitched. Static. Scar RRRRK. Asterisk. As everyone froze. When the vision returned, the silhouette was gone. But the air was colder. The fog, thicker. And beneath it all, Leo could swear he heard laughter. Not cruel. Not joyful. Just wrong. Bloody hell. I finally understand why people go insane in this place. Fuck me, nobody can survive this madness for months at a stretch, Leo realized as he subconsciously tightened his grip on his blades. This place was a literal clown show, and no amount of reading could ever have painted him an accurate picture of how dangerous this place really was. He had been to literal battlefields where thousands died every second that felt less stressful than this place. As for the first time since entering this world, he realized he wasn't afraid of dying here. But rather he was afraid of becoming something that didn't know how to die. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Time-stilled world, 5 kilometers into the forest of death. Minutes passed, and the fog surrounding the team did not stop thickening. It kept creeping higher and higher, rising from their chests up to their necks, as Patricia, the shortest in the group at 5 feet 10 inches, now had her night vision goggles dipping beneath the line of fog, making it impossible for her to see more than half a meter in any direction. Shadows flickered where there should be none, trees vanished into the white of the fog, and the path ahead seemed to narrow, collapsing into a corridor of ghostly haze. Everyone, link up. Use the same hand you're holding your mana stone with to grab the wrist of the person in front of you, Raiden instructed, as each of them reached out to clasp the wrist or forearm of the one ahead, moving in single file like children crossing a battlefield. Leo was near the center, Patricia ahead of him, Bob behind. Raiden led from the front, with Cypher and Carl forming the rear. Don't speak unless you have to, Raiden warned. If the grip loosens, shout. If someone breaks off, stop. The rules sounded simple on paper, yet in execution, they proved insufficient. Because just minutes later, it happened anyway. A flick, a twitch, a whisper. Something moved behind me, Bob said lowly. Leo turned sharply, his grip instinctively tightening around Patricia, who also shifted at that moment. And for that one terrifying moment, her hand slipped from Carl's, which immediately alarmed her as she tried to grab it again, only to miss it completely as she clutched at nothing but air. Raiden. Carl's voice tore through the fog. There's a break. Patricia followed up, as she took 2 cautious steps forward, hoping to bump into him, but her hands met only emptiness. What the hell, she whispered, unable to fathom how someone who was just ahead of her could disappear so suddenly. Stay put. Patricia. I can hear you. Hold on. Over here. Voices called from a distance, sounding like they belonged to Raiden, Cypher, and Carl, but coming from at least 20 to 30 meters away. There's no way to be sure if it's really them. Don't respond, Leo said immediately, his voice tight and low, as he narrowed his eyes in anger. Those voices might not be real, we can't trust any voices in this forest. He warned, as Patricia nodded, her eyes wide. Do not chase. Do not move. Let's just stay put for now. I doubt even this cursed forest can perform teleportation magic, so we should be fine as long as we don't move. The fog must clear out eventually, Leo reasoned, as both Bob and Patricia gave firm nods in return. The trio backed into each other, forming a 3-point stance. Triangle formation. Blades drawn. Fog curling up to their noses now. Leo's mind reeled. He tried absolute vision again, but instantly regretted it, as the skill returned nothing but screaming white static, which forced him to shut it down before it made him nauseous. This fog's not normal, Bob muttered. It's hard to breathe in, and there's no way to know if it's toxic or not. He tore a strip from his assassin robe and tied it over his mouth like a makeshift mask. Leo didn't argue. He reached into his storage ring and pulled out an actual gas mask, one he had bought from the Orange Panther's store before departure. Creak. A wooden creaking echoed from somewhere nearby, instantly alerting the team. Then, a human-shaped silhouette drifted behind the mist which faintly bore the height and shape of Raiden. Raiden. Leo called once, hoping to hear back from their teammate, but unfortunately only silence followed, until finally. We're here. Hold on. The voice came, soft and slow, in Raiden's tone, but distorted. Like someone playing a recording just a little too slow. No one replied. Squeak. Bob's fingers tensed around the leather shaft of his tall knife, the slight squeak sounding as he adjusted his sweaty grip on the weapon. And although no words were exchanged, that sound alone was enough for Leo and Patricia to understand his thoughts. They felt it too, deep in their guts. That silhouette wasn't Raiden, and whatever was approaching them was definitely not their teammate. The silhouette didn't stop. In fact, it multiplied. 2 more forms emerged behind the first, gliding forward through the mist in eerie synchrony, just like their formation. All 3 walked hand in hand, the leading figure bearing Raiden's frame, followed by Cypher and Carl, their outlines vague but familiar enough to stir the heart into hoping. They stepped into partial view, their faces calm, too calm, their movements precise. Almost too precise. Carl was the first to speak, his voice carrying a light cheer as if nothing was wrong. Sorry, he said, smiling gently. My hand must have slipped. He reached out toward Patricia once more, his hand extended for hers. But before he could make contact, Patricia slapped it away without hesitation, eyes sharp with distrust. Don't, she said coldly, fingers curled tighter around the hilt of her blade. Raiden's gaze shifted to Leo next, locking on like a magnet finding its charge. Leo didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, his voice casual, almost amused as he spoke. Say, Raiden, what was the name of the bistro we first met in? There was a pause. Too long of one. Raiden's brow furrowed, his tone turning clipped. What does it matter? He snapped. We don't have time for games, let's move on. He reached forward, this time for Leo's wrist, as slash. Bob moved. A single, fluid motion, as his blade carved through the fog, slicing through Raiden's arm at the elbow. Thud. The limb dropped with a dull thunk, but there was no blood, no bone visible. Just bark. Where flesh should have been, there was splintered wood wrapped in a tight weave of fibrous vine. Cracks raced along the remaining arm like spiderwebs, spreading through the figure's body like fractures in a porcelain shell. And then the truth unraveled. The three forms contorted, first twitching, then unraveling as the illusion peeled away to reveal creatures carved from rotten bark. Their faces remained human-like, eerily accurate masks molded from the memories of those they mimicked. Tree nymphs. Born from cursed trees. Fed by fear. Molded by memory. Over the past few hours, these damned creatures had learned their formation, their voices, their rhythm. And now, it was testing how much they remembered about each other, as if Leo had not somehow figured their deception out, then it would have probably led them to their source tree, where they would be restrained and absorbed for nutrients. Sigh. Leo took a step back, raising his blade with a slow exhale. Well, he muttered, cold and steady. So much for waiting out the fog. As he lunged at the three targets in front of him, with Bob and Patricia in support. Together, the three of them easily dismantled the tree nymphs, who were barely any fighters apart from their deceptive abilities, as once they took care of the nymphs, the fog began receding noticeably. Time-stilled world, 5 kilometers into the forest of death, Team B. I lost her. I lost Patricia. Carl's voice came out broken and frantic, as he began hyperventilating like a tired dog. Keep your voice down, Raiden replied immediately, one hand stretched out, palm raised in caution, as he tried to peer through the ever-thickening fog. I had her wrist. I did. But she let go or I slipped, I don't know. Breathe, Raiden said, voice calm but stern. Nobody moves, we stay right here. If they're nearby, they'll find us. Cypher didn't say anything at first, but his eyes flicked sideways, scanning the dense mist swirling just centimeters from their night vision goggles, his expression unreadable. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Still nothing major happened, there was no movement in their surroundings, and no signs of Leo, Patricia, or Bob. The silence in the air dragged longer than any of them liked, as eventually, it was Cypher that shifted his stance. I don't like staying still, he muttered. Not in this place. Feels like we're sitting ducks for someone to come and kill. Raiden exhaled through his nose, then gave the faintest of nods. Fine. But we move slowly, only one step at a time, and the two with extreme caution. With Cypher at his side and Carl following behind, the three of them began advancing at a snail's pace, every footfall deliberate, every breath shallow. The fog continued to get worse. It clung to their bodies like webbing, and swirled under their armor like worms. Their visibility was practically zero, and the density of the fog felt weird, like they were walking through swamp water rather than mist. Guys, Carl's voice came again, softer now, almost a whisper. I think I hear something behind us. Sounds like fighting. Raiden stopped, but didn't look back. While Cypher shook his head. Don't turn, don't listen, it's nothing but illusions, he said flatly. That's exactly how the forest of death gets you. Makes you doubt your senses. Makes you chase ghosts. Raiden said nothing, only kept moving. Carl followed, though his face remained twisted in hesitation with every echo of metal on metal coming from somewhere beyond the fog. Then, snap! The unmistakable sound of twigs cracking rang from beside them, which was followed by movement. Three forms emerged, vague at first, then clearer, though still wrapped in mist. Raiden's chest loosened ever so slightly when he recognized the shapes, Leo's sharp frame, Patricia's lean stride, and Bob's towering bulk. They walked forward in a slow, synchronized line, just like the rest of them had been trained to. We found you. Raiden called out, relief flooding his face as he hurried toward them. Bob didn't say anything, just gave his signature smile, twisting the twig in his mouth from side to side. Leo raised a hand and gave thumbs up, while Patricia smiled faintly, as she initiated the touch to Carl. The two teams merged without hesitation, as Raiden took a quick head count and counted 6. Finally, they were back together. "Stay close this time and don't let go," he ordered. "Let's keep moving." They resumed formation. But just 2 minutes later, it happened. Carl stumbled. His foot caught on a root, and as he pitched forward, he yanked on the arm of the person in front of him. Only the arm didn't resist. It broke free and came apart in his hand, before suddenly turning woody in texture. "The hell?" Carl muttered before dropping it immediately as he scrambled backwards. "Raiden." Patricia's arm just came off from her shoulders and turned to wood in my hands, he declared, as Raiden froze, while Cypher drew his weapon in a blink. The figure they'd believed to be Patricia jerked, then twisted. Her smile cracked like glass, her eyes rolled to black, and bark peeled from her skin like dead scabs. Raiden didn't wait. "Form up. They're fucking tree knives," he warned, as the figures began to unravel. Each face, Patricia, Leo, Bob, morphed into something wooden and warped. Smiling masks over rotting trunks, as their limbs twisted unnaturally, stretching like sap-drenched tendrils as they lunged. They struck fast, but Raiden and Cypher were still faster. Cypher ducked a sweeping vine arm and drove his dagger into the creature's neck, only for it to explode into dust and bark. Raiden cleaved another from shoulder to hip with a mana-coated arc, while Carl backed away, using kitchen knives to disrupt their balance. It wasn't a hard fight. But it was sobering. As the last of the false figures collapsed and dissolved, the fog began to thin. Slowly, light seeped back into the space around them, with the surrounding trees becoming visible once again. But there was still no sign of the real Leo, Patricia, or Bob, as the trio realized their big mistake. "Shit," Raiden muttered. "We've walked too far to find them now," he added, as Cypher nodded in agreement. "Unless there's a miracle that can reunite us, we have to assume that we are on our own now," Cypher said, as Carl clutched his head in disbelief, behaving like the world had just ended. "We need to find them. We need to find them somehow," he muttered, as Raiden placed a sympathetic hand over his shoulder. "I want to find them as well, Carl, but look around you. Can you differentiate the next tree from the one behind us? It's impossible to maintain any true sense of direction in this place. All we know is that we're heading west, though even that feels more like a guess than a certainty. Our only hope is that, if we keep walking west, we'll cross the forest within 7 to 10 days. However, if we don't keep sight of that goal and begin searching all around for the rest of the team, we might actually get lost without a way out. So unless you want to stay in this cursed place permanently, dust yourself off, man up and continue walking," Raiden said, as he forcefully pulled Carl back to his feet and urged him to keep walking. Time-stilled world, 6 kilometers into the forest of death, Leo's team. The fog had finally lifted. Gone was the choking whiteness that had wrapped around their necks like a noose, as it was now replaced by a haunting clarity that somehow felt even worse. The white trees loomed larger without the mist to blur their forms, their trunks twisting unnaturally, as they all looked gloomy and impossible to differentiate from the other. The silence surrounding them was deeper too, as gone were the occasional whispers and false illusions, as the forest seemed to have reset to its base settings. "We're not finding them, are we?" Patricia finally asked, her voice quiet as she lowered her goggles, revealing tired eyes. Leo said nothing at first. He simply looked around, eyes scanning the now visible terrain, as if expecting Raiden, Cypher, and Carl to suddenly step out from behind a tree. But unfortunately, they didn't. "We're too far," Bob answered instead, adjusting the massive blade in his hands. "Even if they're alive, the forest's probably shuffled us all apart." Patricia sighed. "Shuffled us apart? What are we, cards in a deck?" She kicked a stone, watching it bounce down a slope before muttering, "So what now? Do we head back to base? Try to trace our steps and pray they do the same?" Leo finally spoke, his tone firm. "No. We keep moving forward. Patricia's head whipped toward him. Forward. Are you insane? She stepped closer, gesturing wildly as she spoke. Carl was our ration mule, Leo. He was carrying the main storage ring for supplies. Without him, we don't have enough food to finish this expedition. I know, Leo replied, calm as ever. We all have emergency packs. Enough to survive 90 days. 150, if we ration smart. That's not enough to complete the mission and make it back, she snapped. Even if we sprinted, we'd be gambling every day after day 90. And if we don't find Carl or the others by then. Leo met her gaze evenly. Then we die. Patricia stared at him like he'd just grown a second head. Are you serious right now? Leo didn't flinch. We didn't come here for a nature walk. You knew the risks. So did I. The mission doesn't stop just because it got hard. Bob crossed his arms, nodding. I'm with him. Of course you are, Patricia muttered bitterly. Two idiots with a death wish. She paced for a second, hands running through her hair, before spinning back around. And what if we don't find food? What if we don't find the damn castle we are supposed to? What if this place just keeps getting worse? Leo looked away for a moment, eyes drifting to the unnatural treetops above. Then we improvise. Patricia laughed, short, sharp, and bitter. Improvise. Right. She stared at both of them, trying to gauge if this was really happening. If they were truly choosing to march to their deaths for a mission that might already be a lost cause. And then, reluctantly, she sighed. Fine. I'll come. Bob raised a brow. Really? Patricia's eyes narrowed. Yeah, but if we don't find food in the next few weeks, I'm eating one of you. She looked at Leo first. Then Bob. Then back at Leo. Probably you, she decided. You look weaker than Bob, I can probably take you on. Leo didn't even blink. I'll shred you to 51 pieces before you even touch me. Patricia smirked. I was hoping for 69. And just like that, the decision was made. The trio were moving forward and relying on their emergency rations, as they hoped and prayed that they would reunite with the other team sometime soon. Meanwhile, Twin Fang Planet, Black Serpent's Guild Headquarters, Administrative Wing. Location: Central Data Operations Hall, 1842 local time. The room buzzed with quiet activity, dozens of analysts hunched over terminals, hollow displays flickering with mission data, planetary scans, and guild-related assignments. The air smelled faintly of room freshener and strong coffee, as the Black Serpents were nothing if not efficient and alert. Ping! A shrill tone cut through the low hum of conversation. New high-clearance communication, barked one of the analysts, eyes widening as red overlays flashed across his screen. Universal Government Header. Real-time relay. Priority Alpha 3. That got the room's attention, as a senior operations officer, Administrator Taloven, strode over. Display it, he ordered. The hologram expanded above the central table, as lines of encrypted code decrypted to show a formal message bearing the Universal Government seal. Greater than notice, cross-departmental security flag less than. Subject: Maxtern, Carl, false identity alert. Level: Transgalactic threat, level 2. Summary: Recent purges within the Intelligence Oversight Division have revealed forged identity records spanning 3 galactic sectors. The individual known as Carl Maxtern is not a certified culinary division contractor or a master rank warrior. Real identity: Carl Investial. Known alias: the Ash-Sworn Butcher. Threat level: Transcendent class combatant. Affiliation: confirmed ties to the evil cult. Last verified movement: dispatched under forged credentials to Operation TSW Expedition Number 045A under Squad Leader Raiden Voss. Immediate action required. Initiate recall protocol if possible. Notify Galactic Police. Log breach in Black Serpent's personnel ledger. The room was silent. Taloven's mouth twitched. You're telling me, he said slowly, we greenlit a transcendent level called Operative, into a godforsaken time-stilled world, with one of our elite licensed squads. One of the analysts ran a cross-reference through the registry. He's embedded with Raiden's team, sir. They're already into the time-stilled world, we can't stop or alert them now. They're on their own. Fuck. Tallow cursed, running a hand through his head, as he almost couldn't believe it. How could they allow such a security lapse to happen? Sending a transcendent-level criminal with their elite team of Grandmasters was a sure-shot death sentence. As if they were not dead already, they were sure to be dead soon. Put an arrest order on the criminal, inform all flights going in and out of the spatial anomaly that Karl Vestiel is not to be rescued out. Tallow instructed, as the administration workers immediately followed. A few days ago, the real universe, Planet Radiance. Karl was living his undercover life as a simple universal government clerk on Planet Radiance, when suddenly one day, he received a sealed package from the cult, sent personally by the 11th Elder. He immediately locked his doors, activated his privacy seals, and turned off the surveillance nodes scattered around his unit, before unwrapping the obsidian-threaded parchment with trembling hands. Inside was a single note. Infiltrate the Black Serpents as an external help, enter the time-stilled world and retrieve what Dupravel seeks. Attached beneath it was a secondary fold, bearing a full mission briefing, forged identity papers, a purchase bill for an aura-suppressing tool, and a fabricated combat record labeling him as a master-tier culinary support specialist with mild healing capabilities. His new name, Karl Maxtern, age 31, master tier, field chef. For a moment, Karl simply stared at the papers, eyes narrowing in disbelief. A time-stilled world, he muttered, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. Everyone knew what it meant to enter such a place. A slow death, a distortion of time, a trial of the mind. And yet, as he read the next paragraph, his heart began to beat harder. Dupravel Nuna has entered the time-stilled world of Sector 12. After his alleged communion with the deceiver Morris, he now seeks an item of critical importance. We do not know what it is. Only that it holds enough value for Dupravel to risk his life. And hence we must acquire it first. That last paragraph changed everything for Karl, as if Dupravel, the very spine of the Black Serpents, had gone personally to retrieve something. It could only mean that the item hidden inside that world wasn't just valuable. It was game-changing. Perhaps a divine artifact. Perhaps a remnant from a past age. Perhaps something even Morris himself wanted desperately. And whatever it could be, it was surely better in the hands of the cult, rather than the enemy, and hence it was important that Karl retrieved it first. Gulp. Swallowing hard, he first pulled out the payment slips to a local blacksmith shop, documents provided by the guild, showing that he had already purchased a full set of aura-suppressing artifacts, as without delay, he began walking toward the designated store to retrieve them. Upon arrival, the shopkeeper, himself a cult sympathizer, recognized the code on the envelope and immediately assisted him, helping secure each piece of the relic set onto his body with practiced efficiency, as the transformation began the moment the final clasp clicked into place. His once overwhelming, transcendent-level aura began to fade, swallowed beneath the web of suppression artifacts until what remained was the quiet, unassuming presence of a mere master-tier warrior, as even those sensitive to mana would now see nothing more than a forgettable field cook. But concealment required more than relics, as he hunched his posture slightly, rounded his shoulders with the tired curve of a man who lacked pride, widened his eyes to appear constantly nervous, and adopted a shrill, almost childlike tone, one that made him sound younger, less experienced, and completely unthreatening, the kind of man who wouldn't survive a real battlefield even if his life depended on it. A couple days after that, Karl met the team for the first time on planet Twin Fang, and from there onwards, he played his part flawlessly. He adopted a timid, fidgety, stammering personality, whereby he clutched his culinary satchel close at all times like it was his lifeline. He bowed too often, lowering his gaze whenever someone looked his way, and spoke with a stammering accent, which conveyed to others that he was not the most confident kind of kid. However, behind those veiled eyes, he studied each member and carefully profiled them. Raiden, calm, disciplined, predictable. Cypher, quiet, sharp. Patricia, dangerous and narcissistic. Bob, Cold, analytical, not one to underestimate. Leo, the enemy of the cult who led to one of his brothers dying. He was smart, however. Carl resolved to kill him in a special way once they were alone inside the time-stilled world. A few days after his first meeting with the team, when they finally did enter the time-stilled world, Carl already saw the mutated lizard ambush coming 5 minutes before Leo was alerted, as he saw the shadows moving near the ridge far before he did. If he wanted to, he could have warned the team about it. But he didn't. Instead, he let the beasts arrive. He shrieked when they lunged. He soiled himself with a simple water spell to add authenticity, and by the end, he played the part of a timid and scaredy master tier warrior to perfection, as everyone grew even more assured of his weakness. Their eyes revealed that they saw him nothing more than a harmless, unfortunate cook caught in the middle of chaos. Which was exactly what he wanted them to believe. Even inside the forest, Carl's act remained consistent, as he did not let anyone find out that he did not actually need the night vision goggles to see in this dark terrain. He trembled when holding hands, flinched at every sound, and kept his actions consistent. But when the tree nymph eventually linked with him and Raiden and Cypher failed to catch the deception, he finally knew that he had to act. The texture of her hand was wrong and felt too dry to be that of a human. And even the mana in her body was too still to belong to a living person. Hence, he knew it was a monster and could have easily severed the arm on instinct. But he waited until a couple minutes passed, and Raiden and Cypher also dropped their guard, before tripping and pulling its arm off, as he exposed the fraud in front of them. He did so, because he wanted to make the reveal seem like an accident, rather than him picking on information that the others missed, which was why he waited as long as he did for the accident to take place. For Raiden and Cypher, he was nothing more than a foolish and timid chef. However, the truth of the matter was that he wasn't a fool. He was a transcendent tier agent working under the 11th Elder of the Cult of Ascension. And his hunt inside this cursed world had only just begun. Time-stilled world, 21 kilometers from forest entry, Leo's team, day 2. Almost an entire day had gone by since Leo and the others got separated from Raiden's group, and thankfully, nothing significant had happened during that time, as the last 24 hours passed in a haze of silent walking, cautious glances, and the ever-present weight of the forest pressing down on them from all sides. Patricia adjusted the strap on her satchel with an irritated grunt, her boots sinking deeper into the mulch with every step. Are we even going the right way? Or are we just walking in fucking circles? She snapped, glancing around at the seemingly identical trees stretching endlessly in all directions. Because none of this shit looks different. Leo didn't answer right away. He kept walking with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, as he said, "We are moving in the right direction, don't worry. Just follow my lead." However, while he himself was confident of his directional skills, both Bob and Patricia seemed uncomfortable with continuing to walk blindly. She's got a point. This terrain hasn't changed for hours. How do you know we're not looping? Bob asked in a firm tone, as Leo paused and let out a deep sigh. Watch, he said, as he pulled out a dull gray radar from the satchel Raiden had given all team members and pointed towards the reading being displayed on the device. The two of you also have this device on you, pull it out and note the distance being displayed here. It shows that we are 161.0 kilometers from the entry point beacon we set up, Leo said as he walked up to a nearby tree and carved an X into the bark. Then he took a few slow steps forward. See, 161.1 now. He stepped a few paces to the side. Back to 161.0. He looked at them both. This is the straight line. I've been mentally keeping track of it while walking, as the moment we deviate even slightly from this line, the distance resets. Currently, it takes me about 124 steps to cover the distance of 100 meters, and so anytime that it takes me 127 to 130 to do the same, I make a small course correction and ensure that we get back to the precise 124-step pathway, which is the shortest, straight-line distance due west. That means we're not circling. We're still heading west, toward the exit of the forest. Patricia stared at the mark, visibly calming, as Leo's explanation made a lot of sense to her. Gee, I've never felt so wet and turned on because of someone's brains. Guess there's more to men than just their pretty faces, she said, almost smiling now. All right then, since you know what you're doing, lead on, Skyshard. Bob added, as they resumed their journey. After every 8 to 10 hours of walking non-stop, the team took a short break where they made a clearing on the ground, dumping surrounding moss and dirt to make a boundary, as they ensured that their backs touched no trees or roots. Gods, this is dry, Patricia muttered, nearly gagging on a tough piece of dehydrated nut loaf, as she ate the emergency rations with a visible disgust on her face. Chewy and joyless. I used to think good food was nothing special back home, but now I realize it's the only thing that kept me sane in this cursed world. She said, as she tore a bite of the loaf in anger and kept chewing at it grumpily. Leo didn't comment. Neither did Bob. Although the two of them also did not enjoy the dry rations, they were thankful for the meal regardless and did not fuss about it like Patricia. Meanwhile, Raiden's team, in a different part of the forest. Unlike Leo's group, who were surviving on dry rations and flavorless packs, Raiden and Cypher ate like kings. The firestones that Carl set up glowed a soft orange beneath the blackened cooking wok, as he dropped in thin slices of root vegetables, letting them hiss and sizzle before swirling in a few bottles of sauce, turning it into a steaming, aromatic broth that filled the air with warmth. Cypher slurped quietly, expression blank, while Raiden sat a few feet away with arms folded, his back against a moss-coated tree, saying nothing. The last 2 days since their separation had been nothing short of exhausting, as unlike Leo's team, who had somehow escaped further chaos, they were attacked almost every 2 to 4 hours, and were forced to fend off against wave after wave of twisted creatures lurking within the forest. Unfortunately for Raiden, Cypher wasn't much help in actual combat, and Carl was about as useful as a wet twig, forcing him to shoulder the brunt of the fighting alone, pushing harder and taking more risks than he ever liked to. Thankfully, he hadn't picked up any major injuries just yet, but if he did, he already knew what he'd have to do, which was to set up a temporary shelter, hunker down, and wait out the pain until his body normalized again. As without anyone else to rely on for safety, he did not wish to continue moving while in an injured state. Carl, meanwhile, stared down at the broth, his thoughts far from the moment. Raiden and Cypher, they're steady, I'll give them that, but they're also slow, dull, predictable and replaceable. His hand twitched slightly on the ladle. He could have done it last night. A bit of powdered root extract in the soup and he could have taken both of them out without a struggle. But he didn't. Not yet. Not here. Because the truth was, he didn't want to be alone. Even in a broken world like this, the silence that followed solitude wasn't something even a transcendent assassin like him could afford. Raiden and Cypher were tools. Imperfect ones. But ones that still helped him feel grounded, keeping him sane. So for now, they lived. And he continued stirring the pot. Time-stilled world, 143 kilometers from forest entry, day 12. Over the next 5 days, the group had to battle their way through the forest with barely any time to breathe, as there were no quiet stretches anymore, no peaceful walks between fights, and certainly no mercy from the creatures that stalked them non-stop. Every few hours, some new horror would leap from a treetop or claw its way out from beneath the ground, forcing the team to raise their weapons and brace for yet another bloody encounter. The attacks kept coming. Each fight blurred into the next, and although most of the enemies weren't impossibly strong, their endless frequency began to wear the team thin. The more complex the fight, the harder it became to rely on mana stones. Holding one in your hand while dodging fangs and claws wasn't always possible, and in those moments, the only choice was to cycle the tainted mana of this world, a choice that came with a cost. Each draw from this corrupted realm chipped away at the edges of their minds, as slowly but surely, the signs of madness began to show. Damn it! I've done it again. I've absorbed more of this cursed mana. Raiden cursed, punching a tree so hard that blood cracked from his knuckles. He kept going, even after the bark broke. Even after it hurt. As if the pain grounded him. As if punishing himself could undo the damage. Nearby, Cypher crouched in silence, pulling at his eyelashes one by one, his eyes fixed on the dirt with a blank, unfocused stare. It had started 2 days ago, when he suddenly picked up the habit of pulling at his lashes out of nowhere. However, now, in just a span of 2 days, most of his lashes were gone, and his fingers still twitched at the space around his eyelids as though the motion had become involuntary. No one spoke about it. But everyone noticed. Sleep had become shallow and filled with twitchy jerks. Meals were taken in silence and chewed without joy. Words became fewer. Glances became colder. And slowly, the cracks began to show. Carl laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. Cypher's hands hovered a little too close to his weapons even when there was no threat. Raiden's orders grew sharp, clipped, and far less patient than before, as though he too was slipping under the weight of constant pressure. Even Bob, who had been the quiet rock of the group, began sleeping further from the others and speaking in shorter phrases than what he usually did, his answers growing more curt with each passing day. And Leo, who watched all of this from behind a mask of calm, understood what none of the others wanted to admit. The team was beginning to unravel. They were barely a day or two away from exiting the forest, but the mood within the group had never felt more brittle. Something was rotting. And Leo could feel it in the way Cypher's eyes twitched when someone moved too fast, in the way Carl lingered a second too long while handing over food, that things were reaching a boiling point. If only I could figure out who in this group is attracting the monsters, I can silently take them out and continue on this journey with the rest. Usually, I would just ditch the group as a whole and be gone on my own. However, even I am not foolish enough to be alone in this world. There's a strength in numbers and having a group is definitely useful as long as the members are sane, Leo thought to himself as he tried to decode the mystery behind who exactly was attracting the monsters amongst them. He knew it couldn't be him or Bob, as while the two of them traveled alone, traveling was quite easy, which meant that it had to be one of Raiden, Carl or Cypher. Carl was undeniably weak, and if he had committed a crime as blatant as Patricia's, like lighting a fire and drawing the forest's wrath, then the pattern would have repeated, with every monster targeting him and him alone. But that wasn't happening, which was precisely why Leo ruled him out. In his head, he felt confident that it had to be either Raiden or Cypher who were the problem. However, it was proving to be near impossible to find out who. The monsters who showed up attacked all of them with indifference, which was why Leo began considering the idea of eliminating them both once they got out of the forest. That night, as they sat in silence under a thick canopy, each person hunched low to their meal, the tension that had been brewing beneath the surface for days finally began to leak. No one said anything for the first few minutes, each person too tired, too bitter, or too far gone in their own thoughts to spark conversation. But then, in the middle of a dull bite of boiled root and hardened grain, Cypher looked up. "Hey Carl," he muttered, his voice flat but laced with irritation. "Do you mind chewing a little less loudly? Your fucking munching is drilling a hole through my skull." Carl blinked twice, caught off guard by the sudden accusation, as he looked around, confused. "But, I'm not even eating," he said softly, holding nothing in his hands. The moment those words left his lips, Cypher stood up without hesitation, his boots crunching over the dry forest floor as he walked straight toward him, locking eyes with a look that made the air suddenly feel heavy. "What was that?" Cypher asked, his head tilting ever so slightly, his tone quiet but dangerous. "You calling me a liar now? You think I'm deaf? You think I don't know what I hear?" Carl didn't respond. He just stared back with a tight-lipped expression, eyes flicking with discomfort, as though trying to decide whether to argue or just stay silent. But the look was enough. Cypher didn't wait. His hand lashed out with a sharp slap that sent Carl's head jerking sideways, a red imprint already blooming across his cheek. "You glare at me again," Cypher hissed, grabbing him by the jaw and forcing him to make eye contact, "and I swear on every god in this cursed realm, I'll poke those eyes out of your skull, bend you over and fuck you till you bleed from your ass. Don't test me, you worm. His words cut through the camp like blades, sharp and vulgar, and for a second, no one moved. Not even Carl. Until Raiden stepped forward, his face twisted with disbelief, as he grabbed Cypher's arm and yanked him back. That's enough, Cypher. He barked. You need to chill. Because while Carl's chewing didn't hurt my ears, your senseless shouting sure as hell does. But Cypher didn't appreciate the interruption. He turned, shoved Raiden back with a two-handed push to the chest, and locked eyes with him like a beast sizing up another predator. For a heartbeat, the two stood inches apart, both breathing hard, as the forest around them seemed to fall dead silent again, watching, waiting. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Cypher backed off with a scoff, turning away as if nothing had happened, while Carl sat frozen, his face still burning, his eyes filled with a quiet, simmering rage. Leo said nothing. Bob didn't flinch. But in that moment, even without words, it became clear to all of them. The insanity had started to creep into their behavior. And it had started to creep in much faster than the books warned them it would. After Cypher's outbreak, Leo wondered what could be the reason behind the group's growing mental instability. After all, the books he'd read had warned of madness creeping in slowly, over weeks, not days, yet the team was already snapping at each other like rabid dogs. However, after thinking about it for just a few minutes, he understood exactly why. It wasn't the forest alone. Even back on any normal planet, if a person was forced to stay awake for days on end, constantly running, constantly fighting, constantly under threat, while being starved of proper sleep, food, light, and comfort, cracks in their demeanor were sure to show. Not because they wanted to be irritable, but because they simply didn't have the patience left to be kind anymore. The constant threat and lack of proper rest left a temporary impact on one's brain, and in this cursed world, that weariness was worsened tenfold, corrupted by every cycle of tainted mana they were forced to draw, every improperly cooked meal they ate due to time constraints, and every single second they spent walking in a loop that never seemed to end. The forest didn't just pressure the body. It whispered threats in one's mind. And it whispered constantly, until the silence began to feel louder than words, louder than thoughts, louder than sanity itself. No wonder Cypher looked like he was on the cusp of losing it. His eyes twitched randomly now. His hands trembled even when he wasn't using mana. His lips moved sometimes even when he wasn't speaking, and Leo had begun noticing the way his fingers hovered around his blades even during meals. The signs were there. Maybe I should just kill him first after we're out of the forest, Leo thought, narrowing his eyes at Cypher from across the campfire. Maybe I don't need to kill Raiden just yet. Raiden, for all his faults, still seemed a lot more in control of himself compared to Cypher. He too was slipping, yes, but he still managed to hold his composure, meaning that he could still be managed. Cypher, on the other hand, was wild. Unpredictable. Dangerous. A liability. One wrong trigger and he's going to stab someone while they're asleep. Best to silence that risk before it grows fangs. Leo didn't even realize he was staring until Bob nudged his arm and nodded at the food pouch. Leo blinked, nodded back, and returned to chewing, but in the back of his head, a decision was slowly beginning to take root. The journey to the edge of the forest was the last that Cypher was making, as sooner rather than later, Leo planned to take him out. Dash 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 dash. Across the circle, Carl sat quietly, his eyes lowered, his breathing slow, but his insides burned with rage. The slap Cypher gave him a few minutes ago still echoed in his skull. That single act of humiliation replayed like a broken record, and no matter how much Carl tried to smother it beneath thoughts of mission focus or patience or tactics, the sting remained and his ego throbbed. You slapped me, Carl thought, his hand twitching just slightly as he stirred his own food. You insulted me, threatened me, grabbed my chin like I was some child. And you think you're going to walk away from that? His lips didn't move, but his pupils narrowed. You're nothing, Cypher. A bug. A fucking insect who doesn't realize he barked at a transcendent in disguise. In his mind, He'd already played out a dozen variations of how Cypher would die. Some slow, some fast, some while everyone watched, some in silence. But the one common thread between them all: pain. No one will suspect me. I will orchestrate your death perfectly. Perhaps, I shall use a gush of wind to push you in the path of a monster's attack while you're trying to evade it. Perhaps I shall treat your next wound with poison instead of medicine. Maybe I'll just isolate you from the group and murder you with my own two hands. As with no witnesses around, who's going to question it? His fingers clenched around the wooden spoon just a bit tighter. You don't even know it yet. But your fate's already been sealed. You slapped a man you should not have offended, and now it's over for you. He didn't glare, didn't scowl. He smiled, just a touch too wide, and held it a moment too long, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. And all the while, the others sat around him, chewing through another half-cooked meal thrown together in a rush between fights, too focused on survival to notice the weight of murderous intent drifting through the circle like smoke. The shift had begun. The group had finally started to turn on one another. Barely 10 minutes after they finished their meal, the group was attacked yet again by a monster, this time a near-invisible chameleon, who sprayed poison and lashed out with a highly corrosive tongue. It came without warning. The group did not see it, nor smell it or hear it before it struck. As it wasn't until a sharp hiss rang in the air, almost like steam escaping from a kettle, that they noticed the threat. FSSSSSSSK. The attack struck, burning Raiden's head cloak and barely missing his head, as he ducked at the last second. Ambush. Bob roared, blades already drawn, as everyone spun to face the source of the attack. But there was nothing. The chameleon remained cloaked, its body pressed tight against the massive trunk behind them, scales bending light, limbs blending with the woodgrain like it was part of the forest itself. And then it moved. A pulse rippled through the forest darkness, and Leo's eyes narrowed as he caught the faintest shimmer against the wind. Something tall, coiled, watching them, mid-canopy, 5 o'clock. He shouted, already flanking right as Cypher dropped low and pulled his daggers free. Crack! Another lashing tongue split the air, this time aimed directly at Bob's chest, only to miss as he dove and rolled, kicking up a cloud of dead leaves. Carl stood near the rear of the formation, unmoving. Not out of fear, but anticipation. He didn't draw his blade. He didn't reach for a spell. He simply stared, eyes wide and lips parted, as the chaos bloomed around him. And then, he smiled. Just a little. Just enough. Because he could sense that his moment was coming. The monster was strong, clearly intelligent, and had a lethal attack that could one-shot a Grandmaster if it connected, and hence Carl saw his opportunity to take Cypher down. He began observing Cypher in great detail. Every twitch, every breath, every detail of his movement, from the way his boots skidded on wet moss, to the way his left wrist flinched slightly when he tried to parry, as Carl's fingers twitched behind his back in anticipation. He could use a light wind gust to push him off balance and no one would even notice. However, he couldn't do it now. He needed to wait for the right opportunity to present itself. I just need the perfect moment, he thought, pupils dilating slightly as another burst of movement tore through the air, this time, the monster leaping from the tree. Boom! It landed. Hard. A massive chameleon with gnarled limbs and skin like rippling moss crashed into the clearing, its camo flickering like static as it dropped all pretense of stealth and revealed its hideous frame. 7 feet tall. Lithe. Built like a predator. Its tongue recoiled back into its jaw, now dripping with glowing venom that hissed with every drop hitting the soil. FSSHHFSSHH. It hissed again, twitching as if analyzing each of them. Raiden and Bob moved instantly, one to the left, one to the right, trying to split its focus. Cypher braced near the center, arms trembling slightly as he raised his daggers. And Carl stayed still, watching, waiting, and smiling, ever so faintly, as he waited to see if he could end Cypher right here and now. After landing on the ground, the chameleon turned even more aggressive as it let out a sharp, distorted screech, its body twitching with feral energy as its camouflage flickered on and off like a dying light bulb. FSSSHH. The corrosive tongue lashed out again, burning a shallow crater into the ground where Bob had been standing a split second earlier. Don't clump. Raiden barked, dodging right. Force it to divide its focus. The team spread out, moving with trained discipline despite their exhaustion, as they rapidly changed their positions. Bob darted behind a trunk, drawing the creature's gaze with feinting jabs, while Raiden took the lead from the front, engaging it head-on with low, measured slashes. Leo, silent as ever, slid to the side, keeping to the shadows, as he blended and vanished in them, waiting silently for an opening to appear. Meanwhile, Cypher flanked left, spinning his daggers and circling low, his eyes wide and frantic, but his hands still sharp enough to react. Soon, the chameleon snapped its jaws and lunged again, only to meet Raiden's blade mid-thrust. Clash! Sparks flew. Acid hissed. And this time it was the monster that staggered, as Raiden used the attack rapid slash to injure its tongue. Now, Leo thought, as he stepped in after spotting an opportunity, his body blurring as he activated 1,000 phantom strikes. Immediately, his body turned into a flurry of afterimages, as each step he took left behind a translucent echo of himself, an echo that was always followed through with a slash. Shink, shink, shink. He tore through the creature's flanks, disrupting its momentum and forcing it back, as green blood sprayed in arcs and its camouflage broke entirely, revealing the mossy, fungal flesh beneath. And this was when Cypher spotted his chance to attack. Now, he roared, surging forward for the finishing blow, when suddenly he took a wrong step. A gust, a shift, a misstep, a mistake that could happen to anyone, but should not happen at this level, as his eyes widened in disbelief and his body propelled forward in a way that was not entirely in his control. Crack! He stumbled forward a fraction too far, his torso exposed just long enough for the monster to retaliate, as its tongue shot out and slammed into his ribs with brutal precision. Thud! The impact sent him spinning through the air, his body crashing against a tree before dropping to the dirt, where he began shrieking in pain. Cypher! Raiden shouted. Leo's eyes narrowed, but his blades didn't stop. He advanced relentlessly, slicing with precision, as Bob came from the rear to assist. Together, the two overwhelmed the beast. And soon, with one final strike, Leo embedded his blade deep into the creature's skull, and activated Kill Strike to blow its brains out. Thunk! The chameleon collapsed, dead. And once again, the forest fell into silence, save for the writhing, guttural screams of Cypher, who clutched his torso with both hands as thick steam curled from the venom hissing through his shredded clothes, burning straight into the flesh beneath. Shit, he's bleeding a lot, Carl muttered as he rushed over at last, dropping to one knee beside Cypher and beginning a quick assessment. This is bad. His hands moved quickly, tearing away fabric, inspecting the full extent of the damage. The venom had carved straight through skin and muscle, leaving a deep, raw trench down the left side of Cypher's abdomen. If I can't plug this wound immediately, Carl said, his voice grim, deliberately loud enough for the others to hear. He might go into a coma. Or worse. What? Cypher gasped, voice high and cracked as panic set in. His breathing grew faster, more ragged, as he tried to push himself up. You can fix this, right? He asked, as Carl gave him the most cruel of smiles from close up. Of course I'll try my best, he said before turning towards the others, as he urged them to move away. Go back. Give the patient some room to breathe. He's hyperventilating, Carl ordered, as he used his superior strength to hold Cypher in place, as he forcefully stopped his thrashing. As ordered, the rest of the team stepped back reluctantly, a wide semicircle forming around the two as Cypher whimpered, now visibly trying to fight against Carl's grip as sweat poured in buckets from his brow. Carl leaned in. His fingers, steady and controlled, reached into his pouch, not for a healing salve, but for a nearly invisible packet of anticoagulant. He mixed it swiftly into a red-tinged ointment, spread it over a thin gauze, and began wrapping the wound in tight, confident layers. From the outside, it looked like precision and care. But beneath the gauze, the anticoagulant already began its slow sabotage. With a wound this size, if the blood loss did not stop immediately, Cypher was bound to die. And while Carl could have saved him if he tried hard, he deliberately sabotaged his healing instead, as he pushed him closer to death vengefully. Next, he forced Cypher to swallow a pain-numbing potion to dull the immediate pain. Enough to delay suspicion, before pulling out a mid-grade healing potion and forcing a few drops into Cypher's mouth to make his efforts to save the patient look authentic. Finally, by the time he rose, his expression was the very image of grave concern, as he played the part of a caring healer to perfection. "I've done what I can," Carl said, wiping sweat from his brow and standing slowly. "I gave him the best healing potion we have, but it's not looking good. The creature's venom, it's preventing the blood from clotting, so unless we cut away the affected tissue entirely, there's no way to seal the wound." "Then cut it off," Bob said bluntly, stepping forward. "You're saying he'll die anyway if we don't. Might as well try it." "I could, but I'm not sure if he will survive it. The wound is big enough as is. If I cut off more, I would essentially be pushing him closer to death with my own 2 hands, Carl argued back, as Raiden shook his head in depression. "No. Then don't do it. He's still conscious. Still fighting. We'll give it 10 minutes. If the bleeding stops due to some miracle, we will protect him till he recovers enough to move with us. But if he slips into a coma, we leave him," Leo finished, voice neutral. "Agreed." Cypher's breathing grew erratic again. What? You can't leave me here. I'm gonna be fine unless Carl doesn't treat me properly." "Carl, you bastard. I don't trust you. You slimy bastard. You treated me properly, right?" Cypher's eyes darted wildly from face to face, but no one moved. No one offered reassurance. Even Raiden said nothing, his jaw locked tight, his arms folded. And then, slowly, Cypher's voice began to weaken. His protest slurred, his arms sagged, and blood kept pooling. His fingers twitched, then stilled, and a blankness rolled over his gaze as his body tipped backward into the dirt with a soft thud. Until he stopped moving altogether. Raiden bent over him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. A long pause passed. "He's alive," he said at last. "But he's slipping into shock due to excessive blood loss. Coma's close." No one spoke. And no one disagreed. "We move in 5, Raiden announced coldly, as the team collectively let out a sigh of regret. Carl stared at the unmoving body in front of him. "Shouldn't have slapped me, you dumb wannabe scholar," he thought, hiding the flicker of satisfaction behind a mask of guilt. Soon, 5 minutes passed and it was time for the team to move on once again, as Raiden paid Cypher his final respects. "I will miss you, old friend," Raiden said while standing over Cypher's unconscious body, as he placed one of his daggers on his chest, before moving on. It sucked that they had to abandon him before he was completely dead. But saving him was clearly impossible. Which was why, Raiden and everyone else made the practical choice to move on. As the initial group of 6, was now whittled down to just 4. Real world, Planet Tithia, evil cult headquarters, the First Elder's office. "Ha ha." The First Elder let out a dry, humorless chuckle as his eyes skimmed over the fresh report laid out before him. He almost didn't want to believe it at first. Because believing it would mean accepting that everything he had built, everything he had bled for, had amounted to nothing in the end. It would mean admitting that 75 years of service, 60 years of planning, and an entire generation of effort had unraveled faster than he could contain it. But denial wasn't going to change the ink etched into the page. Just like how closing his eyes wasn't going to make the truth fade away. 75 years. That was how long he had served the cult, 60 of which had been spent wearing the robe of an elder, a title not gifted by seniority or birthright but earned through blood, through patience and through a meticulous devotion to building something greater than himself. As through those 60 years, he had endured betrayals from within and sieges from outside, but had never wavered in his mission regardless. He had survived wars against the righteous faction and elder politics within the council. He had crushed rebellion with one hand while offering olive branches with the other, navigating the shifting tides of war and diplomacy with equal precision, even going so far as to broker peace with representatives from the righteous faction whenever the cult needed him to play the role of mediator, as he willingly traded away minor concessions and peripheral assets just to buy the cult a few more precious years of uninterrupted growth and preparation. And yet, despite all that, the crisis before him now felt like the most dangerous trial of his entire existence, not because it was sudden or overwhelming, but because it was built on the very architecture of everything he had constructed with his own two hands. For the past 6 decades, he had been nurturing undercover assets, embedding them like rot beneath the skin of the Righteous Alliance, and nobody within the universal government was any wiser. He had been corrupting hundreds of offices and bloodlines with bribes, secrets, and silent conversions, turning one loyal official after another into tools of the cult, but it was all crumbling now. Slowly, but surely, he had made an empire of cult sympathizers embedded within the universal system. However, after the attack on the Sky God Arena, he was unfortunately being forced to watch it all unravel before his own eyes. Decades of patient sabotage was unwinding in a matter of weeks, as one by one, the agents he had spent years training, bribing, and blackmailing were being exposed and paraded through the streets as proof of a purge long overdue. It was like watching a spiderweb, one he had spun strand by strand across a lifetime, torn apart in a sudden storm, as the threads snapped in rapid succession, while all he could do was sit back and listen to the wind howl. 32 sleeper agents exposed in the last 48 hours, 6 operations compromised, 4 supply lines cut, and 17 neutral allies disavowed us publicly. The report read, as the First Elder couldn't help but chuckle at the mirthless humor. I knew this would happen, he thought, his voice dry even in his own mind. He had warned them, all of them, warned the council that revealing their cards in such a public, catastrophic manner and striking the Sky God Arena, would not lead to domination, but retaliation. However, they didn't listen to his advice. The younger elders who had grown hungry for blood encouraged the violence, and now he was forced to clean up after them, as he tried to minimize the consequences of that one big attack. Greater than dismantle CELL-13. Burn all the communication devices used in that operation and destroy any evidence that can link that operation to the cult. Greater than reinforce security on planets Juxta, Meredith and Rayon, sending the best security machinery and arms to those planets at the earliest. Greater than activate Project Hollow Seed, start floating rumors about the next dragon candidate being identified and currently being evaluated by the council. Greater than recall or eliminate exposed assets before they can be interrogated by the righteous faction and pull out any remaining transcendent warriors that are working undercover universally. Greater than inform all elders to be mandatorily present for an emergency meeting in 2 days' time, here on Tithia. The elder wrote, as one by one he rolled up the scrolls and handed them over to his assistants who he knew would hand them over to the relevant parties. Just exposing and parading some evil cult agents hiding within the system was never going to be enough for the Righteous Alliance, and the First Elder understood this better than anyone. Over his nearly century-long experience in dealing with them, any humiliation they faced was always returned by a large-scale military retaliation, which meant that sooner or later, a huge border skirmish was likely to break out in Juxta, Meredith or Rayon, which were they frontier planets sharing a boundary with the Righteous Alliance. The question isn't if but when are they going to attack us, and how hard will the blow be? The First Elder muttered, his voice low and frayed, as he folded the report and leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the flickering lantern above. Usually, such answers would come from his network, from the agents he had seated inside the government, whose whispers and fragments always painted the larger picture before the blow ever landed. But now, that web was broken. He could no longer rely on the steady stream of warnings he once trusted, because those assets were either dead, compromised, or had simply gone silent, as the Fourth's aggression had upended every measure of control he had so painstakingly maintained for decades. The Fourth's recklessness has made everything worse, he sighed, his fingers tightening slightly as he stared at the empty corner of the room. If it weren't for him, and the second's bloodthirsty eagerness for war, none of this would have happened so soon, and the cult wouldn't be standing on the edge of collapse. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost as if afraid the walls themselves would betray him. I need to visit Lord Soren. He hesitated, because he knew he wasn't supposed to. Soren had given clear orders to not be disturbed unless it was a matter of absolute, undeniable emergency. But if this wasn't considered an emergency, then what was? I must consult him, whether he chooses to see me or not. I must make the journey to Ixtal, and seek him out, the first elder murmured, as he rose from his seat with a heaviness that spoke of age, burden, and resignation all rolled into one. Because although morale within the cult still held strong, buoyed by the dramatic success of the Sky God Arena strike, that morale was a fragile thing, a blaze that could easily be snuffed out. If even a single planet was lost, or if the Righteous Alliance gained rapid ground through decisive victories, then the momentum they had built would vanish overnight, and the cult, for all its glory and divine backing, would begin to fracture from within. And he could not allow that. Not while he was still the first elder at least, as he just prayed that the god Soren would have a path for him to follow when his own wits were at an end. Planet Ixtal, the Lost Forest, outer gate of Soren's residence. Mavern walked barefoot through the Lost Forest, out of respect for the great god Soren. No expensive robes adored his frame, no escorts followed behind, and no guards flanked his sides, as he made his way across the beautiful terrain of the Lost Forest in a calm trance. His steps were slow, as he often paused to admire the beautiful scenery of this unique forest, before eventually moving on, as he knew he couldn't linger around forever. He hadn't come here in decades, not alone, and never without invitation. But this time, he did not wait for approval or protocol, as he moved like a man who already knew that the weight of his burden was enough to justify the breach in protocol, as he walked patiently until he reached the clearing that he remembered all too well. There it was. The God Castle, Soren's residence. Plain and unadorned, with no guards stationed outside, no torches burning beside its walls, and no spiritual pressure leaking from within, as it looked like nothing more than a noble's forgotten lodge buried beneath vines and time. And yet, Mavern knew better than anyone that no place in the universe was more sacred than the one that stood before him now. He didn't knock. He didn't announce his name. He didn't even look up. He simply stepped to the entrance, lowered his knees, and pressed his head against the stone slab outside the door, as he kowtowed in absolute silence and remained still, knowing full well that if Soren wished to see him, the door would open long before he ever reached out to disturb it. And sure enough, it did. The door opened slowly, without sound, as the air shifted slightly and a familiar scent of copper and incense drifted outward, while from within the darkness emerged a figure that Mavern had not laid eyes on in years but had never once forgotten. The great god Soren, tall but gaunt, draped in impossibly large robes that looked several sizes too big for his withered frame, with pale skin, sunken cheeks, and long strands of black hair that fell over his shoulders like dying silk, as although he looked nothing like the god of war that he once was, the pressure in the air shifted just the same. You may enter, Soren said softly, as he turned and walked back inside, his voice low and without force, but still clear enough to reach Mavern's soul, as the first elder finally lifted his head and rose to his feet. No more words were spoken. As he followed his lord inside. Soren walked ahead with the grace of a veteran warrior, his steps light and casual, his body swaying rhythmically, as despite his advanced age and countless health issues, the old god showed no signs of struggling with mobility, as though his body had long since made peace with its constant state of pain and decay. The first elder Mavern followed a few steps behind, barefoot and bowed ever so slightly, not out of compulsion or fear, but out of instinct, as just being in Soren's presence made even the proudest of elders feel like students again, while the weight of reverence pressed down heavier than command ever could. The air inside the castle was warm but dry. Faint aroma of crystallized herbs and copper seemed to linger everywhere, as if it were fused with every stone inside the walls. And although there was no grandeur in the halls, no gold, no murals, no vaulted ceilings, there was still an overwhelming sense of power contained within, as if the walls themselves radiated divine pressure after housing Soren for over a millennium. Slowly, they made their way to a low, circular table at the center of a guest chamber, where a single clay kettle rested atop glowing embers, the water inside already hot but not yet boiling, as though it had been waiting for them. Soren did not speak. He did not summon the teacups with a flick of mana or raise the fire with divine heat. Instead, he crouched slowly, with the careful grace of an old man used to pain, and with his own two hands, he lifted the kettle and poured the tea, in an unhurried and mortal way. *TRRRR, Fs. The steam rose in thin curls that danced in the air, catching faint beams of light from a window nearby. As the moment the cup was full, Soren slid it across the table toward Mavern without looking at him. "Drink," he said softly, his voice calm and steady, but laced with that subtle weight that never needed to raise volume to command obedience. Mavern obeyed, taking the cup into his hands with care, as he let the warmth seep into his fingers before raising it to his lips. The taste was faintly sweet, almost medicinal, but it was the aftereffect of drinking the tea that struck him hardest. Almost immediately after taking the first sip, Mavern felt as though a knot within his chest had untied. As his breath grew lighter, his shoulders eased, and the fog that clung to his thoughts seemed to lift. His eyes glowed slowly, meeting Soren's for just a moment. As for that brief instant, the entire weight of the cult, of leadership, of suffering and secrets, felt smaller. "You brewed this yourself, my lord?" Mavern asked, his voice quieter than he intended as the question slipped from his tongue without deliberation. Soren smiled faintly, still not looking directly at him as he poured himself a cup. "Of course. I have a tea garden in my backyard, and I enjoy processing and brewing it with my own hands," he said, taking a sip. "It's one of my hobbies that keeps reminding me what it means to be human." Mavern nodded slowly, unsure how to respond, the tea still warming his chest like a memory of a time before responsibilities. "You should sit down, drink tea and relax more often," Soren said after a pause, finally looking at him with a gaze that was both steady and ageless. "Your health is deteriorating faster than mine, child. And I'm not sure the cult can afford losing another First Elder for a while." Mavern lowered his eyes slightly. Ashamed that he was indeed aging like crazy. "I'll keep that in mind, my lord," he replied, as Soren nodded. "So, what brings you here today? You look very concerned." "Little one," Soren asked in a calm tone, as Mavern let out a dry laugh. On his way here he had a whole speech ready on how he was going to explain his problem to the great god. However, after coming here and sitting for a cup of tea, he couldn't bring himself to talk so conservatively anymore, as he simply broke down like a child before a parent. "My lord, the cult is on a war path again. Although no attacks have happened, they are but an inevitability, and I'm afraid we don't have the strength to hold the righteous faction off. Morale within the cult is at an all-time high and the young ones are roaring for a fight, but I'm not sure if we are strong enough to win it. Without you to lead us from the front, I really don't have faith in us surviving this war at all," Mavern began, as Soren broke into a soft smile. Mavern looked deeply troubled, the weight of recent events etched plainly across his features, but Soren merely smiled at the sight of his concern, not mockingly, nor with indifference, but with the patient calm of a man who had lived through far worse storms than this. "The cult has always been at war, my child," Soren said softly, his voice carrying no strain. "It's been at war since before you or I ever drew our first breath, and it will continue to be at war long after our bones have turned to dust." He paused for a moment, allowing the silence to sink in, before continuing. "The land we control may swell like a tide or recede like a breath, but land is not the soul of the cult. It's the ideology that must never die. And it won't. Not even if I perish. Not even if the last fortress is razed and we are hunted to the edge of existence. Even then, the cult will survive. So do not worry about our survival." And with that, he took a slow sip from his tea, the movement graceful, deliberate, almost serene. "My lord, that's not what I'm afraid of," Mavern said quietly, his voice tightening. "It's the assets. The web I spent 6 decades weaving is being burned thread by thread. The enemy has begun a deep purge. They're exposing our people, parading them like criminals through the streets, executing them worse than strays. He clenched his fists slightly as he leaned forward, his voice fraying around the edges. If things continue to unfold this way, I fear we'll lose something far more important than territory. We'll lose the trust of the shadows. No one will dare become a double agent for the cult again, not out of loyalty to the Alliance, but out of fear that we can no longer protect them. In the war of soft power, we are losing already. Mavrin explained, as this time Soren nodded in agreement, his expression turning more serious than before. Yes, the old god said after a moment, his voice quieter now, as though the realization had settled into him fully. You are right to be concerned. If the shadows begin to falter, for if the informants and spies who once acted without hesitation begin questioning whether the cult can protect them, then we are not facing a tactical loss. He looked up, his eyes sharp despite the wrinkles carved deep into his face. We are facing a psychological one. Mavrin didn't respond immediately, his throat going dry, as the air around them turned heavier than before. Soren leaned back slightly, the motion slow, his aged spine protesting as he adjusted his seat, before he let out a long, tired breath that sounded far older than the man himself. The Righteous Alliance has always relied on fear to make us bleed, Soren continued, but we relied on belief. Not just in me, not just in the elders, but in the idea that we would rise again. That we were part of something unshakable. That even if they died, the cult would live on stronger. His voice didn't rise, but the room still seemed to fall silent around it, as if every word pressed deeper into the stone. But now, I fear that belief is fading. Mavrin stared at the steam rising from his cup, his lips parting slightly before closing again, as though unsure if he should interrupt, until finally, he forced himself to speak. Then what do we do, my lord? He asked. How do we give them belief again, when your presence alone is no longer enough to inspire them? Soren didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the kettle and poured more tea into both cups, the motion slow and steady, while the rising steam coiled between them like a ghost from the past, as though the silence itself needed to be allowed its time to breathe. Only once both cups were full did he speak again. We give them someone new to believe in. Mavrin looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. Someone new. Soren met his gaze. No, he corrected softly. Someone old, made new again. A pause passed between them, long and loaded, before Soren finally leaned forward, the light catching the edge of his gaunt cheekbone, as his voice dropped lower. We find the bearer of the prophecy. Mavrin's eyes widened, not in shock, but in understanding, as he realized exactly which prophecy Soren meant, even before the old god continued. We find the next dragon. Mavrin said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any protest. Because they had tried. Again and again. For the last 30 years, the cult had poured time, resources, and lives into training the next dragon, grooming orphans from forgotten corners of the universe, invoking ancient rituals, and injecting candidates with the most potent awakening serums they could craft. And every time, they had failed. Sometimes the candidates were too weak. Sometimes their personality was too volatile. And on the rare occasion they did find one who showed promise, someone with the right instincts, the right blood, the right spark, they never lived long enough to see their potential realized. They were hunted, intercepted, assassinated, always just as they began to rise. Mavrin clenched his fists beneath the table, the bitter memory of their last failed candidate still fresh in his mind. Noah Ashburn, the best dragon they had seen in the last 200 years. A boy from the Shakar ruins. Quiet, disciplined, brilliant, dead due to Dupraval Nuna, hunted, betrayed and killed. My lord, Mavrin said slowly, his voice catching on the words. We've been trying. For decades. We've pushed everyone with even a drop of the timeless assassin's blood to the edge, awakened rights no one remembered how to control, and spilled oceans of resources into candidates who barely made it past the Grandmaster stage. He looked up, eyes tired. And even when we did find someone, they never survived long enough to become the symbol we needed. Soren's expression didn't change, but the lines around his eyes seemed to deepen. I know, he said. I remember each of them. He paused, gaze distant. But we cannot stop. If they failed, they were never the true dragon to begin with. When the true dragon rises, the cult will rise with him. That, I am sure of. When the true dragon rises, the cult will rise with him. That, I am sure of. Soren said confidently, and it was that unwavering certainty that finally put Mavern at ease. It wasn't that Mavern did not believe in the ancient prophecy. Like every true follower of the cult, he too believed in the eventual rise of the dragon. But centuries of failure had slowly begun to wear down that faith. There's a boy, Mavern said carefully. He was born on a monoless planet, but after a series of life-altering events, he's now a prime candidate to become the next dragon. The 12th Elder is nurturing him currently, though he refuses to bring him into the cult's fold until the boy is truly ready. A monoless planet, you say? Haha, yes, I remember, Soren chuckled, his tone lightening. My father, being the shameless womanizer that he was, used to frequent those planets outside the rainbow stream, always convinced that true beauty could only be found where mana did not reach. He paused, then added, I've never met the 12th Elder personally, but if I recall correctly, he was the sworn brother of the previous dragon, wasn't he? When Mavern nodded, Soren smiled faintly. If he's the one nurturing the next dragon, then I have high hopes for the boy. Mavern shook his head. The boy is nothing like Noah, he's cold, ruthless, calculating. The kind of warrior who'd sell out the cult to save his own skin, and sleep just fine afterward. I'm not sure I want someone like that carrying the title of dragon. But even so, he still feels like a better candidate than what the 4th Elder is raising. Soren smiled faintly at the words. You and all the first elders before you have been fixated on raising a dragon with the right ethical standards. But it might be time to reconsider. Perhaps it's wiser to place your faith in someone who values survival over ideals. A pragmatic dragon who looks after himself might outlast a noble one who throws his life away for others. In the end, a colder dragon could be exactly what the cult needs right now. With that, Soren slowly rose to his feet, prompting Mavern to do the same. I understand, thank you for your time, my lord, Mavern said, bowing deeply before making his way toward the exit, with Soren silently accompanying him. Don't worry about the cult being wiped out just yet, child, Soren said, stopping by the doorway. I may be growing old, but I'm still strong enough to protect us for at least another century. Even if the righteous faction attacks, they won't get far. That much, I assure you. With that, he shut the door behind Mavern, sending him off with a rare peace of mind. Mavern had come seeking guidance on how to stabilize the cult. And though he received no clear instructions, he left with the resolve he needed to face the storm ahead. Trust and nurture the next dragon. That was Soren's advice, and so that was exactly what he intended to do. But the question remained, who would that dragon be? Can Leo Skyshard really become the next dragon? Mavern wondered, as he made his way back from the Lost Forest. Leo might not have been his first choice, but right now, he was the only candidate they had left, as the 4th Elder's pick was simply an abomination that wasn't even worth considering. Meanwhile, at an undisclosed training ground, domain of the 4th Elder. A tall man covered in glowing runes and countless tattoos stood amidst a field of fresh corpses, his body drenched in blood while his expression remained devoid of emotion, as though slaughter was no different from breathing to him. There was nothing human about the way he looked or moved, as his form resembled that of a half-demon more than any man alive, and if only a pair of horns jutted from his skull, he could have passed for one without question. From head to toe, his skin was inked with shifting sigils that pulsed faintly with light, wrapping around his limbs like living circuitry, as the markings were not ornamental but alive, flickering with energy while feeding off something unseen, something stolen. He crouched beside the nearest body, placing one hand over the chest of the slain warrior, as for a brief second, the air around them shimmered, and then, like smoke pulled into a flame, a thin stream of silver mist began to rise from the corpse. The man inhaled slowly as the essence from the corpse was drawn into his palm, the runes along his forearms flaring brighter with each passing second, while his muscles tightened, his eyes darkened, and his entire body drank in the spirit without leaving a trace behind. Spirit drain, that was the name of the method he had just used to steal the energy of a dead man's soul. As within the cult, it was considered one of the forbidden techniques, taught to no one but the true dragon himself. Ha ha. Chuckling softly, the man rose to his feet, his breath calm and measured, while the ground around him still bore the chaos of the slaughter he had unleashed. 7 kills. 7 spirits harvested. And still, his hunger remained. Lord Vare, a voice stammered from behind, timid and uncertain, as an assistant stepped into view, trying not to look at the broken bodies that still twitched in death. The 4th Elder has asked for a progress report. He wishes to know when you will break through to the transcendent realm, so that you may be presented as the next dragon. Vare did not turn to face him. He raised his hand instead, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek while studying the crimson trail it left across his fingers, almost as though the texture fascinated him more than the question. Tell him I'll reach the transcendent threshold in 2 months, he said plainly, while his voice remained unshaken and composed. Tell him he can unveil me then. The assistant nodded quickly, bowing without further question as he backed away, for everyone under the 4th Elder's service knew the truth now. Vare wasn't just another dragon candidate. He was a prodigy unlike any seen in centuries, one who had already received some of the cult's most sacred and coveted techniques to set him on the path to inheriting the dragon's mantle. From the 2nd Elder, he had received the ancient power ritual that etched most of the glowing tattoos across his body, while from the 4th Elder, he had been granted Spirit Drain, a forbidden method designed to help the true dragon ascend realms faster than any traditional warrior. But Vare cared little for the honor of such gifts. To him, the prophecy and the mission of saving the cult meant nothing, while the prestige of becoming the dragon meant even less. Being someone through whose veins the blood of the timeless assassin flowed richly, there was only one thing that mattered to him, which was his own strength. And if pretending to be the next dragon would help him obtain strength faster, then he was ready to play the part of the dragon, until there were no benefits to extract from playing it anymore. Time-stilled world, 170 kilometers from the forest entry, day 14. It took another 50 hours after leaving Cypher behind for the team to finally reach the edge of the Forest of Death, as they brought their long march through cursed terrain to an end. The tree line began to thin as they neared the edge of the forest, with the twisted roots and dense underbrush finally giving way to firmer, drier soil. For the first time in days, the sky above broke through the thick canopy, and light, which had failed to penetrate the cursed forest for so long, fell upon their skin. Slowly, the complexion of the entire world around them changed, as they removed their night vision goggles, and blinked against the sudden exposure, feeling happy to be able to see the world through their own eyes again. But despite the relief of light, peace didn't follow. For the last 2 days, even after ditching Cypher deep within the forest, the team had been relentlessly pursued by monsters, leaving them utterly exhausted by the time they reached the edge. By now, Leo had become sure of it. Raiden was the problem. There was no other explanation. The attacks were too precise, too relentless. Leo had been silent about his suspicions until now, but deep in his mind, he knew for sure now, that the monsters weren't drawn to them as a group, but were rather drawn to Raiden in particular, as he was behaving like a kind of beacon to attract them. Because of him, traversing the Forest of Death had been 10 times harder than it should have been, and Leo had grown increasingly bitter about it. If we don't stop being pursued relentlessly after exiting the forest, I'm going to kill Raiden in the next 2 days, Leo decided, as he too felt too tired to keep up with this charade any longer. In the past 5 days, the most he had slept at a stretch was 10 minutes, and his cumulative time spent taking a break was not more than 2 hours. He was constantly on the move, and over half his day was spent fighting dangerous monsters, which eventually took a toll on his body. This world was punishing enough on its own without the added burden of a teammate who attracted trouble like a beacon, and so Leo decided that if the situation didn't improve after they left the forest, he would get rid of him. But thankfully, it seemed like the situation did improve after they left the forest, as once they left the periphery of the forest, Entering a stretch of ash-gray plains once more, the monster attacks seemed to pause once again. Dash 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 dash. So what's our play after this? Are we supposed to make our way towards those giant floating platforms next? Leo asked Raiden once they left the periphery of the forest, as stretching just a few kilometers ahead of them was an unbelievably long canyon, with massive floating platforms drifting gently across the air, rising and falling at varying speeds like pieces of a broken sky trying to fit back into place. Raiden nodded while adjusting the straps of his gear, his eyes fixed on the ever-moving formations in front of them. Yes, that's our next challenge, he replied, as his voice remained calm despite the stakes. Those floating islands are the only path forward. Some are small, barely large enough to stand on, while others are the size of football fields, but they all shift constantly, as the weird gravity currents above the canyon keep them constantly in flux. Leo narrowed his eyes as he watched the drifting platforms carefully, noting how none of them remained in place for more than a few seconds, while the gaps between them fluctuated wildly from a single step to several hundred meters wide. There's no bridge? Leo asked again, just to confirm. No bridge, Raiden confirmed. You time your jumps right, or you wait. That's the rule. And if you miss the right moment, it might take a week, or even 2, before you get another chance at the same pattern again. He paused as he pulled out a folded navigation scroll from his pouch and glanced at it once more. If everything lines up, we can reach the other side in 5 days. That's assuming perfect timing, minimal error, and no serious injuries mid-jump. And if it doesn't? Leo asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it out loud. Raiden shrugged slightly while folding the scroll back with care. Then we're stuck here for up to 2 months, maybe more. Leo clicked his tongue softly, as he looked ahead again. The canyon was deep, impossibly deep, with no visible bottom in sight, while the floating islands above it drifted in and out of alignment like an unsolvable puzzle, as if daring them to try. One wrong jump could mean death. One delayed move could mean waiting for weeks. And if any monsters waited on those islands, the difficulty would only multiply. Still, Leo said nothing, as he knew that forwards was the only way to go. Dash 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 dash. As the team slowly approached the periphery of the canyon, Leo couldn't help but recall the notes of a senior assassin he had read back in the Black Serpent's library, as that journal contained an entire section dedicated to the floating steps and the canyon ahead. According to the journal, the assassin and his team had reached the canyon's edge like everyone else, but instead of attempting to time their jumps across the floating platforms as most did, they decided to get creative. Believing it might be safer to traverse the bottom could they reach it, they sent one of their members down into the canyon using a long coil of rope, hoping to determine how deep the drop truly was, and whether traversing the bottom on foot before climbing up the other side could be a viable alternative. Altogether, they had enough rope to lower him down to a maximum depth of 5 kilometers. However, just after they had lowered him roughly 1 to 1.5 kilometers, the weight on the other end of the rope suddenly vanished. In a panic, the team began pulling the rope back, only to realize that their teammate was already gone. Whether he slipped and fell, whether a flying beast took him, or whether the world itself swallowed him whole, no one could say for sure. However, even after shouting and waiting for him for a full day, there was no response to be heard. That day, although they did not find out as to how deep the canyon truly was, what they did understand very clearly was that descending into the canyon was not an option. As in the end, they had no choice but to cross the canyon using the floating steps like everyone else. During night, the canyon sings to you, allures you with thoughts of suicide and tempts you to take the plunge, resist it. Don't look down trying to gauge its depth. Always keep your eyes towards the sky, the old assassin had written, as Leo held those words close while approaching the boundary. Time-stilled world, edge of the canyon, day 14, late afternoon. As the team finally reached the very edge of the canyon, they came to a halt without Raiden needing to give the order, as the sight before them felt like something carved at the end of the world. The canyon stretched so far across that the opposite side was barely visible, and so deep that nothing but pure blackness stared back from below, swallowing everything in sight like a void that had never known light. There were no birds, no trees, no rustling leaves in sight. Only wind. Constant, heavy wind that howled up from the abyss without rest, sweeping across the cliffside like a warning that refused to fade. It wasn't strong enough to push them back, but it was loud enough to drown out words, as it carried with it the dry scent of old stone and the faint, metallic taste of something long decayed. They stood there for a moment, eyes locked on the shifting formations ahead, while the wind screamed around them without pause. Then, beneath the howl, something else began to rise. A sound, faint at first, almost like a whisper trapped between the cliffs, but unmistakably real, growing clearer with every passing second. It began as a low hum, but slowly unfolded into something more, a distant tune drifting up from the abyss, as though 1,000 forgotten instruments were playing from far below, blending together in a melody that didn't follow any rhythm, yet refused to stop. The music had no pattern, no beat, no clear source, yet it wasn't unpleasant either. It simply lingered, floating through the air like it had always been there, playing for no one in particular, as if the canyon itself was remembering something. None of them spoke. They remained at the ledge in silence, eyes scanning the sky ahead, where floating platforms drifted slowly through the open air. Each platform moved at its own pace, rising and falling, rotating slightly, or sliding forward with no visible cause. At that moment, 7 platforms hovered within reach, each one different in size and altitude. The first was small and close, but barely large enough to land on. The second was wider, but moved erratically with sudden shifts. The third looked solid, broad, even, and smooth in its motion, while the fourth was cracked along the edges and tilted dangerously to one side. The fifth was angled too far to land safely, while the sixth and seventh moved in overlapping circles that made timing uncertain. The team studied all 7 in silence. They evaluated not just which one to leap onto first, but also which one offered the best path forward, for if the second jump looked impossible, there was no point in choosing the first step. And hence, after a short deliberation, they all came to the same conclusion. The third platform from the left was the best starting point. It was wide and stable, and moved slower than the others, with its position also offering a clean connection to 3 more islands beyond it, each spaced evenly, with minimal vertical shift. "That one," Leo finally said, pointing toward it, as Raiden nodded without a word, while the others adjusted their stance and tightened their grips. They began calculating the rhythm. How long the platform hovered. How far it dipped and how fast it climbed. How wide the jump would be. How long they would need to wait if they missed. One by one, they gathered the courage to move. And as the wind surged again, the team prepared to leap, knowing full well that the moment they left solid ground behind, they would be forced to enter a constant cycle of dangerous jumps to eventually reach the other side. Jump. Raiden led the way without hesitation. He stepped forward and launched off the edge, his body cutting clean through the wind before his boots struck the third platform with a solid thud. Tilt. The platform dipped beneath him, not much, but enough to tilt forward and rock gently to the side, as though it were swaying like a pendulum. Raiden lowered his stance instinctively and stayed near the center, adjusting his weight as the platform swayed beneath him for a few seconds before gradually evening out. The others took note. Bob narrowed his eyes, adjusted his run up, and aimed straight for the center, mindful of how Raiden's landing had shifted the stone. Thud. His boots landed slightly off, but close enough to avoid triggering too much sway, as although the platform still shifted beneath him, it was not as much as before. Carl was next. He did not rush. He waited for the platform to rise again into its 15-second hover, then leapt with precision, angling for the middle step. His landing was cleaner than Bob's, and this time, the platform barely tilted. Just a slight dip, then stillness. While Leo went last, he watched all of it, the arc, the angle, the reactions, and jumped only once the hover peak was fully reset. Land. He landed firm and balanced, barely making a sound, as he crouched low with his hands ready in case of sudden movement. However, the platform only gave a gentle sway beneath him before stabilizing, as it seemed to be able to hold their weights without any trouble. The wind still screamed around them, pulling at their clothes and biting at their exposed skin, while the strange music below continued to hum in the background. No one spoke. They remained on the platform for 5 minutes, just enough time to get into the optimal window for the next jump, as when it was time, they leapt once again without needing Raiden's command. Land. Once again, they all landed without too much hassle. However, this time around, the platform they landed on suddenly changed its speed of ascent and descent, as after they landed, it suddenly hastened its descent and slowed down its ascent, as a new variable was introduced. The next platform the team landed on changed its descent and ascent speed dramatically after they touched down, as unlike the one before it, this one didn't wobble at all, yet its pacing was entirely different. The drop was sharp, almost sudden, while the rise that followed was painfully slow and uneven, as though the platform no longer cared to obey any rhythm at all. There was no predictable pattern to its motion anymore, which made predicting the timing of the next jump very hard, as the team now had to wing it on vibes alone. "Well, this changes the dynamic completely," Carl said as he steadied his footing near the center. "If we can't reliably predict how each island reacts after we land on it, then mapping a clean path forward is going to be near impossible." Everyone nodded quietly, eyes already on the next platform, as they realized that from this point onward, every jump was sure to be a gamble. They waited roughly 20 minutes to make the third jump. Then, as the next island finally drifted within range and its surface aligned for just a brief moment, they leapt. Thud! All 4 of them cleared the 4-meter gap with ease, landing one after another with soft, controlled impacts. This new platform was larger than any of the ones before. Not only was it broad and stable, but it was also perfectly flat and slow-moving, as this was the first platform they'd stepped onto that didn't alter its trajectory after being landed on. "I think we'll be here for a while," Raiden said, watching the platform ahead drift in long, lazy arcs, far out of reach for the foreseeable future. "Yeah, half an hour, maybe an hour and a half," Leo added after timing the rotations, before dropping down onto his back and lying flat against the cool stone. With no disagreements, the others followed suit and took the chance to rest, while Carl silently unfastened his gear and pulled out a compact burner plate, setting it up near the center of the platform where the wind was weakest. He got to work preparing a proper meal. The scent that followed was surprisingly pleasant, warm and earthy, with a faint herbal edge, and after days of chewing through dense nutrient bricks and choking down flavorless energy vials, it felt like a luxury. They settled into place, not in a circle, but scattered across the platform, each man facing a different direction, their eyes occasionally scanning the drifting islands above, as even in rest, none of them let their guard fully down. Leo sat near the edge, his arms resting loosely over his knees as the endless twilight painted his features in shades of ashen gray. He didn't speak, just stared out at the sky in silence, his thoughts finally still. The canyon's music drifted upward in soft waves, quieter now, no longer something to be heard, but something simply there, like a second layer of air wrapping around the wind. When Carl handed him a warm tin bowl, Leo nodded once in thanks and accepted it. His fingers curled around the metal without resistance, and he began eating slowly, chewing methodically, not just for energy, but for the illusion of peace. For a moment, it almost felt like he was back in the normal world. Back where dinner wasn't followed by a dozen near-death encounters. Time passed slowly. Nothing moved. For the first time in days, there were no enemies on their trail. No cursed terrain beneath their feet. No looming sense of collapse pressing down on their every breath. Just stone, wind, sky, and silence. Eventually, Leo allowed himself to stretch out fully, his legs flat, his hands folded beneath his head, his gaze unfocused as the light above dulled just slightly. He didn't mean to sleep. He told himself he'd just rest his eyes. Just until his shoulders stopped aching. Just until the weight behind his skull faded. But exhaustion had already made the choice for him. His breathing slowed, his hands loosened, and beneath the soft, eternal hum rising from the canyon floor, Leo drifted off. 45 minutes later. Skyshard, wake up, Raiden's voice rang in his ears, sharp and steady, as Leo's eyes snapped open and his body responded without hesitation. He was up and alert in an instant, years of conditioning washing away the fog of rest, as he rose to his feet and moved toward the ledge without a word. "It's time to make the next jump," Raiden said, already watching the platform ahead, as Leo joined him and began studying the movement patterns, counting the rise, tracking the dip, and measuring the distance, before finally nodding in affirmation once the timing lined up. "I'll go first," Leo declared, before launching himself off the edge the moment the arcs aligned, as he made the jump with ease. Raiden followed immediately after, his leap slightly shorter but still controlled, as he landed near Leo and rolled his shoulders out of habit. Bob and Carl came next, each clearing the jump without issue, as the fourth platform barely shifted beneath their combined weight. "Woohoo, another easy jump," Carl celebrated after making it. However, it was only then that the team realized that the platform they were on had completely stopped moving. It was imperceptible at first, as the slow-moving platform slowed down even more until it grinded to a halt. However, once it stopped completely, the team could observe how their position was stationary compared to their environment, and that was when they realized that they were in a peril. From here, the platform ahead was visibly higher, with it being at least 30 meters high even at its lowest point. And while the jump itself was not far in terms of distance, the elevation made it nearly impossible to reach with a regular leap, no matter how well timed. "Well fuck, I did not expect that," Carl said, as his excitement turned to depression real fast. Leo stared at the gap, then at the ledge beneath his boots, as he calculated the best path forward. "I think we can make it with a boost. If one of us stays behind and gives a physical boost, we can make it to the other side. And once 3 of us have crossed, 2 of us can dangle Carl from over the ledge by his feet, use him as a human hook, while the last one makes the jump," Leo proposed, as after thinking about it for a while, both Bob and Raiden nodded. "All right, but who stays behind? I'm heavy so I say I go first," Bob said, as Leo nodded and volunteered to come last. "I'll go last, come on, I'm ready to boost you," Leo said, clutching his palms together and bending slightly at the knees, as Bob gave him a firm nod and stepped back to prepare for the run-up. With a short charge and a well-timed jump, Bob planted his boot into Leo's hands as Leo launched him upward with perfect form, sending him clean across the gap, where he landed with a slight skid before finding his balance. Raiden came next. No words were exchanged between them. He just gave Leo a nod and ran forward, hitting the boost point with smooth precision, as Leo thrust upward once more, sending Raiden into a clean arc that ended in a solid landing beside Bob. Carl was last. He dusted off his palms, gave Leo a quick grin, and backed up a few paces, before running forward and launching off the boost with practiced ease. His landing was graceful, almost theatrical, as he came to a soft stop near the others and turned around without missing a beat. Leo exhaled once, relaxing his hands and stepping back to prepare for his own jump. This was nothing new, just a final leap. He took a few slow steps back, gauged the distance, and waited for the platform's dip to settle into its next rise. Meanwhile Raiden and Bob gripped Carl by the ankles, lowering him slowly until his arms dangled toward the ledge, fingers outstretched to catch Leo's hand. Then as everything was ready, he sprinted forward. The canyon wind rushed past his ears once again as he hurled himself into the air, every muscle locked on a single target, Carl's outstretched hand waiting just beyond the edge. Whoosh! He made the jump precisely, jumping a monstrous 25 meters with sheer power, as he stretched his body to its limits, arms reaching out to the maximum as his momentum carried him across the gap. He saw Carl's eyes. He saw the calm in his face as he waited to catch the outstretched palm. However, just after he jumped, he saw that calm demeanor change real quick, as his face contorted into an evil smile. Huh? Leo wondered, as right when he was supposed to catch Carl's palm, he shrunk it back, pulling it just out of reach, as his fingers brushed the edge. It wasn't a flinch. It wasn't a slip. It was deliberate. Carl's fingers retracted with perfect timing, as the smile widened faintly and his lips moved in silence. "The cult sends its regards." The words weren't spoken, but were rather mouthed with intent. Just enough that Raiden and Bob would never hear them, but Leo would see them being lipped, and would think about them in his final moments. The fuck? Leo wondered, his eyes widening in disbelief as he twisted midair, his fingers scraping empty air while his weight began to drop. There was no time to react. No ledge to grab. No hand reaching back. Only the feeling of his stomach collapsing inward as gravity took full hold and he fell. Am I going to die here? Leo wondered, as no scream left his mouth and the world around him slowed down. The wind roared past him, louder than before, and the pale twilight above began to fade from view, shrinking further with every second, as the black abyss below opened wide to swallow him whole. And in that endless moment, as betrayal wrapped itself tighter than the wind ever could, Leo finally realized who the problem in his group really was. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.